Across the United States, towns whisper stories that linger long after the streets fall silent. From shadowed alleys and crumbling hotels to remote hillsides where history seems suspended, these places hold events that defy explanation. Some are etched into the nation's memory through tragedy, strange sightings, or vanished communities, while others preserve secrets in architecture, documents, and the subtle disturbances that visitors report. In each town, layers of time overlap, leaving an invisible residue that feels palpable to those who walk its streets or peer into its abandoned corners. Through these expeditions, you will traverse the eerie heart of Salem's witch trials, descend into Centralia's burning underground veins, glimpse the spectral Mothman in Point Pleasant, and trace the restless echoes of towns like Dudleyville and Cape May. Along the way, you will encounter hidden tunnels, vanished villages, unexplained apparitions, and the histories that refuse to rest, experiencing firsthand the unsettling atmospheres that these mysterious towns continue to preserve. Salem, the trials that refuse to rest. The coastline north of Boston carries a particular stillness in early autumn, when fog drifts in from the Atlantic and gathers along narrow streets lined with 17th century homes. In that quiet stands Salem, a town whose name has become inseparable from one of the most unsettling legal episodes in American history. Beneath the brick sidewalks and restored facades lies a memory that has never entirely faded, rooted in the events of 1692 when fear, faith, and accusation converged with devastating precision. The trials that unfolded here were not legends invented later for folklore. They were official proceedings, recorded in court documents, sermons, and personal testimonies that still survive. Long before the hysteria began, Salem was a divided community, split between Salem Town, a growing port with maritime ambitions, and Salem Village, a more agrarian settlement to the west. Religious tensions simmered within the Puritan congregation, especially after the arrival of Reverend Samuel Parris in 1689, whose rigid leadership deepened existing disputes over land boundaries and church authority. Parish records reveal arguments about unpaid salaries and property rights, suggesting a community already strained by mistrust. When a series of unexplained fits afflicted young girls in Parris's household in early 1692, those tensions found an outlet that would spiral beyond anyone's control. In January of that year, 9-year-old Elizabeth Parris and 11-year-old Abigail Williams began exhibiting convulsions, strange vocalizations, and trance-like states that confounded local physicians. Dr. William Griggs reportedly declared that no natural cause could explain the symptoms, leading neighbours to suspect supernatural influence. Under pressure to identify a source, the girls accused 3 women: Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Parris household, Sarah Good, a destitute beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman entangled in property disputes. Court records show that their examinations in March 1692 were conducted publicly, transforming private afflictions into a communal spectacle. By spring, the accusations had multiplied with alarming speed, spreading beyond Salem Village into neighbouring towns such as Andover and Ipswich. The Massachusetts Bay Colony established a special court of oyer and terminer in May 1692, authorised by Governor William Phipps to handle the growing number of cases. This court admitted spectral evidence, testimony that the accused person's spirit or apparition had harmed someone, despite the absence of physical proof. Transcripts reveal how defendants were pressed to confess or risk execution, and how denial was often interpreted as further proof of guilt. The first execution took place on June 10, 1692, when Bridget Bishop was hanged on Gallows Hill after being convicted of witchcraft. Over the following months, 19 individuals were executed by hanging, and one man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death under heavy stones after refusing to enter a plea. Contemporary accounts describe Corey's ordeal in stark terms, noting that he endured the torture for 2 days before dying on September 19th. The brutality of that method, known as peine forte et dure, underscored how far the proceedings had departed from measured justice. As summer wore on, doubt began to surface even among prominent figures within the colony. Increase Mather, a respected minister, publicly questioned the reliability of spectral evidence in his 1693 publication Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits. He argued that it was better for 10 suspected witches to escape than for one innocent person to be condemned, a statement that signalled a growing unease. Governor William Phips eventually dissolved the Court of Oyer and Termina in October 1692, replacing it with a superior court that largely dismissed spectral testimony, leading to acquittals and releases. By May 1693, the last remaining accused prisoners were freed, and the frenzy that had consumed the region began to subside, though its consequences remained. In 1697, the Massachusetts General Court declared a day of fasting and soul-searching to atone for the trials, and Judge Samuel Sewell publicly apologized for his role. Decades later, in 1711, the colony passed legislation restoring the rights and reputations of many of the accused and providing financial compensation to their heirs. These formal gestures of regret, preserved in legislative archives, reveal an early acknowledgement that a grave injustice had occurred. Despite official apologies, the physical landscape of Salem retained its associations with that year of fear. Gallows Hill, the site traditionally linked to the executions, has long been the subject of debate among historians seeking precise location evidence, though contemporary maps are inconclusive. In 1992, on the 300th anniversary of the trials, the town dedicated the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, designed by Maggie Smith and James Cutler, with stone benches inscribed with the names of the victims. The memorial's stark simplicity invites quiet reflection rather than spectacle, grounding the tragedy in individual identities rather than myth. Not far from the memorial stands the old Burying Point Cemetery, established in 1637, where several figures connected to the trials were laid to rest, including Judge John Hathorne. Weathered slate headstones lean at subtle angles, their carved skulls and winged faces still visible despite centuries of erosion. Burial records and genealogical studies confirm the presence of magistrates and ministers whose decisions shaped 1692, creating a physical link between the living town and the men who once presided over fear. Walking among those graves reinforces how closely authority and mortality stand beside one another in Salem's story. Yet Salem's history did not end with 1692, and its later centuries layered additional meaning onto its uneasy reputation. The town grew into a prosperous maritime hub in the 18th century, sending ships as far as China and the East Indies, a transformation documented in shipping logs and customs records. Elegant federal-style mansions still stand along Chestnut Street, silent witnesses to a period of wealth that followed the earlier devastation. That contrast between commercial ambition and remembered hysteria complicates the town's identity, suggesting resilience alongside unresolved memory. During the 19th century, writers and historians revisited the trials, shaping how future generations would interpret them. Nathaniel Hawthorne, born in Salem in 1804, carried the legacy of his ancestor Judge John Hathorne, one of the trial magistrates, and subtly altered his surname to distance himself from that association. In work such as The House of the Seven Gables, Hawthorne wove themes of inherited guilt and moral reckoning, drawing from the town's past without explicitly retelling it. Literary scholarship often points to this inheritance as evidence that the trials lingered in Salem's cultural consciousness long after the last execution. Modern visitors encounter a town that acknowledges its past openly, sometimes commercially, yet beneath the seasonal festivals and guided tours remains a documented history that resists simplification. The Peabody Essex Museum preserves original trial documents, including arrest warrants and examination transcripts that reveal the language of fear in stark detail. Reading those fragile pages, with their careful script and formal charges, underscores that the events were not metaphor, but legal reality. The names inscribed there correspond to real farms, real families, and real losses etched into colonial records. Paranormal reports have become part of Salem's contemporary identity, though they exist alongside historical scholarship rather than replacing it. The 17th century House of the Seven Gables, associated with Hawthorne's novel and the old Burying Point Cemetery, are frequently cited in accounts of unexplained sensations or sightings. While such claims are anecdotal, their persistence reflects how deeply the trials have shaped the town's atmosphere. Visitors often describe a palpable heaviness near the memorial or within the narrow lanes of the McIntyre Historic District. Skeptics argue that Salem's reputation feeds expectation, that knowledge of the trials predisposes visitors to interpret ordinary sounds or shadows as something more. Historians emphasize the importance of distinguishing folklore from documented fact, pointing to primary sources as anchors against exaggeration. Yet even the most rigorous archival study cannot fully dispel the emotional resonance of the events, because the records themselves testify to fear so intense that it overrode evidence and reason. That tension between rational analysis and lingering unease defines Salem's peculiar hold on the American imagination. Anniversaries of the trials continue to prompt reflection and renewed scholarship, with conferences and publications reassessing motives and consequences. Researchers examine socio-economic pressures, gender dynamics, and the influence of frontier warfare on the collective psyche of the colony. Each theory adds nuance, yet none erases the stark reality that 20 people died because a community accepted invisible harm as proof of guilt. The archives offer explanations, but they do not offer comfort. As night settles over Salem Harbor, and the tide withdraws from the wharves that once launched merchant vessels across the world, the town's layered history seems to fold in on itself, merging commerce, literature, and catastrophe into a single narrative that refuses tidy resolution. The trials ended in 1693, the apologies were issued, the memorial stones were placed, and yet the documents remain, their ink unaltered, recording a season when neighbours condemned neighbours in the name of unseen forces. And in the silence between those preserved words, something in Salem still feels unsettled. Centralia. The fire beneath the streets. Across the wooded hills of eastern Pennsylvania, a near-empty grid of streets marks what remains of Centralia, where the ground itself carries a history that refuses to cool. What appears at first to be a quiet rural clearing is, in fact, the outline of a borough that once supported churches, schools, and more than 1,000 residents. Street signs still rise from the grass, though many lead nowhere, and a few houses stand widely spaced among vacant lots where foundations have long since been removed. Beneath this subdued landscape, a coal seam has been burning for decades, altering the earth in ways that cannot be seen from the roadside. What began in May 1962 as a routine effort to clear a landfill set in motion a chain of events that would ignite coal seams beneath the borough. The town council had arranged for firefighters to burn trash in a pit located near an abandoned strip mine, a common practice at the time in coal regions of Pennsylvania. Although the surface fire appeared manageable, it spread through an opening in the pit and reached exposed anthracite veins that had once fueled the region's prosperity. From that moment forward, combustion no longer depended on what was visible above ground, but on the network of tunnels and seams that lay beneath the town. Initial containment plans appeared straightforward on paper, involving trenches and excavation designed to isolate the burning vein before it could migrate deeper underground. Engineers proposed digging a barrier to cut off oxygen and prevent the fire from spreading, and state funds were allocated to begin the work. Yet the interconnected maze of abandoned mine shafts made precise mapping difficult, and every delay allowed the fire to travel farther through fissures and forgotten passages. Reports from the early 1960s reveal repeated attempts to estimate the burn's direction, but the subsurface pathways proved more complex than anticipated. To understand why the flames could not be stopped, it becomes necessary to examine the nature of anthracite coal and the way oxygen sustains combustion far below the surface. Once ignited, coal seams can smoulder at high temperatures for extended periods, fed by airflow through cracks, mine tunnels, and porous rock. Unlike a building fire that exhausts its fuel quickly, a seam fire moves slowly along available deposits, sometimes travelling horizontally for miles. Heat accumulates underground, weakening overlying ground layers and producing gases such as carbon monoxide and methane, which can escape unpredictably through vents in soil or pavement. Long before evacuation orders were issued, residents started noticing small irregularities that felt easy to dismiss at first glance. Gardens in certain yards failed without a clear explanation, and winter snow melted in isolated patches where warmth radiated from below. Some basements registered elevated carbon monoxide levels, prompting health concerns that were difficult to attribute to a single source. Occasional wisps of steam drifted from fissures in the ground, particularly during colder months, suggesting that the earth was no longer stable in ways that could be readily repaired. In February 1981, a sudden collapse opened beneath 12-year-old Todd Domboski, pulling him into a smoking cavity that exposed the scale of the fire's reach. The boy was reportedly walking in his grandmother's yard when the ground gave way, creating a sinkhole several feet wide that released hot gases. His cousin managed to pull him to safety, but the incident demonstrated that the fire had undermined the surface in ways no one could predict precisely. News coverage of the near tragedy reached beyond the region, shifting the issue from local inconvenience to national concern. Federal intervention arrived not with sirens, but with relocation proposals, funding allocations, and the language of eminent domain. In 1984, Congress approved more than $40 million to relocate residents who wished to leave, recognizing that extinguishing the fire was unlikely to succeed. Many homeowners accepted buyouts, watching as their houses were demolished and the lots cleared to prevent unauthorized access. The departures did not happen all at once, but gradually, as neighbors moved away and familiar streets grew increasingly sparse. Gradually, the town's civic identity was dismantled through official decisions that removed its zip code, closed its post office, and ultimately revoked its borough status. The Centralia post office shut its doors in 1993, and in 2002 the zip code 17927 was discontinued, a bureaucratic measure that signalled erasure in administrative terms. In 2017, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania dissolved Centralia's municipal government, transferring its remaining land to the state. Though a few residents continued to live there, the town ceased to exist in a formal sense, reduced to a geographic reference rather than a functioning borough. A stretch of Pennsylvania Route 61 eventually buckled under rising heat, its fractured asphalt becoming one of the most visible scars left by the underground burn. The highway, once a direct route through the region, developed cracks that vented steam and gases, forcing authorities to close and reroute traffic. Over time, the abandoned section became covered in graffiti, drawing visitors curious about the phenomenon beneath their feet. Eventually, state crews buried portions of the roadway to discourage trespassing, yet the image of warped pavement lingered as evidence of invisible force. Estimates from environmental agencies suggest the coal fire could continue consuming fuel for another century or more, depending on airflow and seam continuity. Some projections extend even further, noting that similar coal seam fires worldwide have burned for generations when left unchecked. The exact boundaries of Centralia's fire are difficult to define with precision, as underground mapping remains incomplete. What is certain is that the combustion persists at depths where surface cooling measures cannot easily reach, sustained by conditions that cannot be fully sealed. Despite buyouts and condemnation notices, a small number of residents chose to remain, challenging relocation orders in court and holding on to properties surrounded by emptiness. Legal battles in the 1990s addressed ownership rights and compensation disputes, reflecting a tension between public safety and personal attachment. For those who stayed, the land represented more than a hazard. It was home, memory, and inheritance. Their presence created a contrast between the state's declaration of uninhabitability and the lived reality of individuals unwilling to surrender place to fire. Monitoring stations still measure carbon monoxide and subsurface temperatures, tracking gases that seep quietly through fissures in soil and pavement. Warning signs posted by state agencies caution against entering restricted zones, citing unstable ground and toxic emissions. Periodic environmental assessments attempt to chart temperature variations, yet the underground nature of the fire makes comprehensive measurement elusive. Even when the surface appears calm, instruments reveal that combustion continues below, altering rock and air in subtle but measurable ways. Today, little distinguishes former residential blocks except stray sidewalks, fragments of foundation, and cemeteries that outlasted the homes around them. St. Ignatius Church, once a focal point of the community, was demolished in 2013 after standing as one of the last prominent structures. Only a handful of houses remain, spaced far apart across land reclaimed by grass and brush. The quiet is not dramatic but subdued, broken occasionally by wind moving through trees or by distant traffic along rerouted highways. Visitors who walk the remaining roads often remark on the absence of ordinary town sounds, noting how birdsong and wind seem amplified in the open space where buildings once stood. The landscape offers no obvious flame, no towering smoke column to signal danger, which makes the knowledge of underground heat feel abstract and strangely detached from the visible world. Historical photographs preserved in regional archives show bustling streets and storefronts that now exist only in memory. Comparing those images to the present terrain reveals how thoroughly the fire reshaped both geography and community. Unlike disasters defined by sudden impact, Centralia's destruction unfolded slowly, measured not in minutes but in decades of persistent combustion. There was no single day when everything ended, no dramatic explosion that marked a final chapter. Instead, the town diminished gradually as heat migrated through coal seams, influencing decisions made in council meetings and courtrooms. The pace of change made it difficult to grasp the full extent of what was happening until much of the community had already dispersed. Even now, on certain cold mornings, faint vapour curls upward from cracks in the earth, reminding anyone who lingers that the stillness is only surface deep. Grass grows over former streets, and birds settle where houses once stood, giving the impression of natural recovery. Yet the soil retains warmth in places where combustion persists, and instruments confirm that the underground reaction has not ceased. Centralia's map may show open land, but below that map lies an active process that continues without regard for human timelines. Somewhere beneath those quiet hills, the fire continues to move in darkness, following seams no map can fully trace. Point Pleasant, the Mothman sightings, before the collapse. By the time winter pressed against the banks of the Ohio River, rumours in Point Pleasant had already begun to outpace reason. The town, small and riverbound, maintained the calm routines of everyday life, with factories humming, children attending schools, and neighbours exchanging news at the corner store. Yet beneath the surface of normalcy, residents sensed something unusual stirring. Whispers circulated in homes and diners alike, speaking of lights in the hills and strange shapes glimpsed at dusk. At first, these were dismissed as tricks of the eyes or fatigue, but over time, the consistency of reports began to unsettle even the most skeptical. On the night of November 15, 1966, two young couples drove past the abandoned West Virginia Ordnance Works and claimed they saw something standing in the dark. The site, a relic of World War II munitions production, was dotted with concrete domes, now weathered and half buried in weeds. As the four friends navigated the deserted road, they noticed two bright red lights hovering unnaturally above the terrain. They described the lights as eyes, fixed, intense and unblinking, attached to a form that seemed too large to be human. Frozen with fear, they watched as it moved with an unsettling purpose before vanishing into the night. The creature, they said, had large glowing eyes and a wingspan that seemed impossible to measure, vanishing before anyone could approach. Even the brief encounter left a lasting impression on the couple, who recounted a figure both humanoid and yet not, with wings that stretched farther than any bird they had ever seen. The ground around the spot remained undisturbed, with no footprints or physical evidence to verify the presence of the being. What lingered was a sense of observation, a feeling that they had been watched, and the impression of something far beyond natural explanation, leaving both fear and fascination in its wake. Within days, the small river town found itself balancing uneasily between disbelief and mounting unease as more sightings were reported. Residents began sharing stories in local diners and on porches, some hesitant to speak aloud, others eager to recount experiences of their own. Hunters and fishermen reported strange lights in the trees, shadows that moved against the wind and feelings of being watched in otherwise quiet stretches of land. Even those who had not personally seen the creature became aware of the growing tension, as a collective consciousness seemed to grasp the possibility that something was amiss beyond ordinary comprehension. Local officers patrolled the overgrown TNT area, noting odd tracks and strange impressions in the mud that defied easy explanation. Deputy Sheriff Millard Halstead investigated the initial report, walking the fields near the ordnance works with flashlights and officers at his side. They found tracks that appeared too large and irregular for deer, with impressions suggesting a weight far heavier than any known animal in the region. Some impressions led to overgrown embankments and then disappeared entirely, leaving no trace of exit or entry. Halstead documented everything meticulously, unsure if the footprints were real or a product of the anxious minds of witnesses. Residents began speaking of shadows flitting near power lines and hillsides, often coinciding with the red glow of eyes reflecting in headlights. Evening drives became exercises in caution, as motorists reported feeling unseen presences along winding roads. Dogs barked at unseen figures, and livestock behaved erratically, spooking owners into checking pastures and barns. Hunters walking wooded paths described fleeting winged silhouettes that seemed to appear and vanish just beyond the edge of vision. The red glow, repeatedly described as piercing and almost sentient, was particularly unsettling, creating the impression of an intelligence observing from above, waiting and measuring reactions. As November turned into December, reports expanded beyond the original sighting near the old power plant. Individuals across town began noting incidents in nearby hills, along riverbanks, and even in residential yards. Children playing after dark told parents about strange noises or brief glimpses of enormous wings. Farmers reported livestock panicked without apparent cause, and travellers passing through remarked on the unease that seemed to hang over the area. Despite skepticism, the sheer number of similar accounts prompted media attention, turning what had been hushed gossip into an emerging local phenomenon. Then came December the 15th, 1967, when rush hour traffic tightened across the Silver Bridge. The bridge, connecting Point Pleasant to Ohio, had been a reliable conduit for years, its suspension structure blending into the everyday life of commuters. On that fateful day, under the weight of routine vehicles and the chill of early winter, the bridge failed catastrophically. Eyewitnesses later recalled a sudden twisting motion and the sound of metal giving way. Panic ensued as cars plunged into the river below, a tragedy that claimed 46 lives and left a community reeling in grief, shock, and disbelief. 46 lives were lost in the span of moments, leaving families, authorities, and investigators searching for meaning amid the wreckage. Rescue efforts continued through the night, with divers recovering victims from the icy river and volunteers combing debris along the banks. The community was paralysed by a mixture of sorrow and unanswered questions. Engineers later identified a fractured eye bar as the cause, citing corrosion and stress as contributing factors. Yet the timing, coinciding with months of mysterious sightings, created a lingering tension between the mechanical explanation and the town's mounting sense that something unseen had been at work. Some survivors recalled seeing strange lights in the sky, or hearing unusual sounds in the days immediately preceding the collapse. These accounts were consistent enough to warrant attention from journalists and folklorists, even if official investigations discounted supernatural influence. Multiple witnesses described low-pitched haunting shrieks or flashes that seemed to follow vehicles along the roads near the TNT area. While inconclusive, these recollections contributed to the narrative of forewarning, a suggestion that the Mothman sightings might have been an omen or signal, creating a haunting sense that the town had been warned of its impending disaster. Experts would later identify the cause as a structural failure of a single eye bar, corroded and unable to bear the load, yet local memory clings to the figure of wings and glowing eyes. Scientific analysis remains uncontested regarding the bridge mechanics, yet in Point Pleasant, folklore persisted alongside facts. Residents spoke of seeing shadows and red lights, attributing to them a prescience or awareness beyond ordinary experience. The story of the Mothman, whether coincidence, warning, or misperception, became inseparable from the tragedy, weaving legend into the historical record and creating a narrative where the ordinary world and the unexplained converged in memory. In the years that followed, Point Pleasant has embraced the legend, hosting festivals, museums, and a statue that memorializes both myth and tragedy. The Mothman Festival, begun in 2002, draws thousands of visitors annually, with panels, storytelling, and guided tours of alleged sighting locations. A 12-foot stainless steel statue, erected in 2003, overlooks the town square, wings spread as if to observe the Ohio River itself. Exhibits in local museums preserve photographs, witness statements, and media coverage from 1966-1967, offering context while maintaining the ambiguity that keeps the story alive. Tourism and memory have intertwined, transforming tragedy into cultural identity. Yet even with museums, memorial plaques, and official reports catalogued in archives, the sequence of events resists tidy explanation. Witness accounts remain conflicting, details of sightings vary, and physical evidence is absent. Scholars continue to debate the plausibility of natural explanations, while others emphasize the psychological and sociological impact on the town. Despite decades of study, the Mothman's role, whether as omen, coincidence, or misidentified wildlife, remains unresolved. The ambiguity itself has become central to the story, preserving a sense of wonder and unease that continues to define the town's collective consciousness. The original Silver Bridge was dismantled, replaced by the Silver Memorial Bridge, yet the Mothman story continues to shape the community's identity. The new span carries traffic safely and efficiently, a reminder of engineering lessons learned and safety measures implemented. Yet the legend persists in storytelling, annual events, and local lore, maintaining a connection between the town's past and present. Visitors pause at plaques and statues, considering both the documented disaster and the mysterious accounts that preceded it. Point Pleasant remains a place where history and legend are inseparable, and the extraordinary can still intrude upon the ordinary. Visitors today walk quiet riverfront streets, pausing at plaques and markers, sensing the weight of something both reported and unseen lingering above the town. The Ohio River flows steadily beneath the bridges, indifferent to human memory and myth, yet the stories endure. Tourists photograph the statue, families recount tales of sightings to one another, and local guides repeat the events of 1966, 1967 as cautionary, mysterious, and compelling. Even decades later, the shadow of the Mothman remains a silent presence, part of the town's identity, its legend quietly influencing how Point Pleasant is remembered and experienced. Because in Point Pleasant, the question has never been whether something was seen, but whether it was trying to warn anyone at all. Roswell, debris in the desert. Mac Brazel noticed unusual debris scattered across his ranch, glinting strangely in the sunlight and resisting any attempt to bend or break it. The fragments were lightweight, metallic, and oddly structured, some appearing flexible, while others maintained sharp, precise edges that seemed almost engineered. Brazel, a practical man accustomed to the hardships of ranch life, was unsettled by the material's behaviour, their reflectiveness, and the way they seemed almost impossible to categorize. He gathered some pieces carefully, aware that their discovery might attract attention, yet uncertain who would respond or how seriously anyone would take a rancher's report of strange objects. Reports of the fragments reached military authorities quickly, prompting an immediate and unusually secretive response that unsettled locals. Officers arrived in trucks, inspecting Brazel's land with a combination of caution and urgency that suggested the situation exceeded ordinary protocol. Conversations were terse, instructions discreet, and the rancher was made to understand that public disclosure was limited. Photographs were taken, notes meticulously recorded, and debris collected in unmarked containers. Locals could only speculate about the unusual activity, noting the intensity of the investigation and the quiet tension that accompanied it. Even the simplest gestures, such as measuring distances or documenting shapes, were executed with a deliberate precision that hinted at hidden stakes. Investigators documented the materials meticulously, recording shapes, textures, and reflective qualities that did not resemble conventional aircraft parts. Thin, foil-like sheets interlaced with unusual fibers, metallic rods with unidentifiable coatings, and fragments that seemed almost weightless were catalogued alongside sketches and photographs. Experts struggled to compare them to any known construction material, noting their resistance to bending and the impossibility of cutting them with standard tools. Observers commented on the eerie perfection of the pieces, as if designed for a purpose entirely foreign to earthly engineering. The meticulous documentation only deepened the mystery, creating a tension between scientific analysis and the inexplicable nature of the objects themselves. Journalists arrived in town scribbling accounts of flying discs, while officials issued conflicting statements that only heightened public curiosity. Headlines described metallic debris from outer space, mysterious crashes, and government interference, often exaggerating or misinterpreting details for effect. Simultaneously, military spokespeople downplayed the incident, insisting the materials were ordinary weather balloons. The contrasting narratives created confusion and fascination, drawing attention far beyond Roswell's population. Locals found themselves answering questions from reporters, neighbours, and strangers alike, caught between the desire to maintain privacy and the magnetic pull of a story that refused to remain quiet in a small desert town. Several residents recalled seeing silent, fast-moving lights overhead in the days surrounding the discovery, patterns that defied explanation. Some described shapes that moved erratically, others spoke of formations that hovered before vanishing instantly. Observers noted an unusual clarity to the lights, their brightness distinct from conventional aircraft or celestial objects. Children reported seeing glowing figures flit across the night sky, while farmers noticed unusual reflections off fences and rooftops. These sightings, often dismissed at first, began to accumulate with such consistency that townspeople could no longer ignore them. The sky, usually empty and indifferent, had become a stage for an event that resisted ordinary understanding. The initial press release declaring a flying disc quickly vanished, replaced with an assertion that the debris had been a mundane weather balloon. The rapid retraction only intensified the public's interest and speculation, prompting questions about what was truly recovered and why the story changed so suddenly. Newspapers preserved the original announcement alongside the correction, creating a contrast that fueled both curiosity and doubt. Residents debated the plausibility of either account, noting inconsistencies in timing, description, and intent. The clash between sensationalism and official explanation became the defining feature of the event, setting the stage for decades of speculation, lore, and distrust that would follow the town far into the future. Scientists examining the fragments noted resilience and lightness that seemed to challenge ordinary physics, leaving even experienced engineers perplexed. Some sheets could be crumpled and returned to their original form. Rods retained their straightness despite extraordinary pressure. Observers remarked on the material's reflective qualities, metallic sheen, and apparent resistance to degradation. No known alloy or composition in common use displayed the combination of flexibility, strength, and weightlessness seen in the recovered objects. Laboratory testing offered limited insight, and each new measurement only deepened the sense of anomaly. The fragments, mundane in size but extraordinary in character, became a focal point for both analytical study and speculative interpretation. Rumours circulated of unusual security measures, areas cordoned off, and unexplained military activity, suggesting more had been recovered than anyone would admit. Witnesses reported heavy trucks arriving at night, fenced-off zones patrolled by armed personnel, and instructions forbidding photography or inquiry. Locals felt the weight of secrecy pressing down on the community, intensifying speculation about the nature of the debris. Some whispered of recovered bodies or technology beyond comprehension, while others remained skeptical, noting only the intensity of the military's attention. Regardless of belief, the pervasive atmosphere of concealment heightened the town's sense that the events were far larger than could be measured by any single discovery. Stories of the incident spread rapidly, drawing journalists, UFO enthusiasts, and amateur investigators eager to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Reporters arrived with cameras and notebooks, while strangers inquiring about sightings became regular fixtures in town. Enthusiasts mapped the area, noting the rancher's property, nearby hills, and suspected landing sites. The media coverage extended well beyond New Mexico, turning Roswell into an unlikely epicenter for speculation, science fiction, and cultural fascination. For the residents, daily routines were interrupted by curiosity and intrusion, as the world outside began to view their small town as a stage for something extraordinary and unresolved. Eyewitnesses recounted flashes of light, metallic reflections, and other unexplained occurrences, leaving a lingering unease that blended fact with speculation. Some described brief glimpses of objects darting across the horizon, sometimes accompanied by humming sounds or sudden gusts of wind. Animals behaved strangely, with dogs and livestock reacting to invisible disturbances. Individuals noted subtle shifts in shadows and reflections, amplifying the sense of surveillance or observation. These reports, while fragmented and inconsistent, collectively contributed to a growing impression that the debris and the lights were connected, that something had touched the town in ways that resisted straightforward explanation. Decades later, declassified documents offered Project Mogul explanations, yet inconsistencies and missing evidence kept doubt alive among researchers. Reports described high-altitude balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests, yet many accounts contradicted the official timeline and technical descriptions. Investigators noted the redactions, missing logs, and testimonies from military personnel that remained inconsistent or unclear. Scholars and enthusiasts alike scrutinized the documents for overlooked details, seeking correlations that could reconcile fact with anecdote. The ambiguity preserved the mystery, suggesting that even the most official records could not fully contain the complexity of what had occurred over Roswell's fields in July 1947. Material analysis of the fragments revealed properties that seemed almost engineered for unknown purposes, prompting theories both scientific and speculative. Thin metal sheets resisted bending beyond natural limits. Some fragments contained unusual alloys or coatings not recognized at the time. Comparisons with conventional materials fell short, leaving gaps in understanding that encouraged speculation about advanced human engineering or extraterrestrial origins. Laboratories, private collectors, and amateur researchers debated the meaning of each observation, often drawing conclusions that diverged widely, yet maintained the central tension. These were objects that defied ordinary categorization and challenged conventional scientific assumptions. Conflicting testimonies, vanished reports, and heavily redacted files ensured that the story's mystery continued to grow rather than dissipate. Military personnel gave contradictory accounts. Civilians remembered events differently, and physical evidence often disappeared or was withheld. Even decades later, interviews with witnesses produced inconsistent narratives, yet all contained a common undercurrent. Something unusual had occurred. The lack of consensus, combined with lingering fragments and memories, created fertile ground for legend and speculation. The story of Roswell became less about a single fact and more about a network of impressions, documentation, and silence that refused to resolve neatly. Modern Roswell has become a destination for those drawn to unexplained phenomena, with museums, festivals, and exhibits celebrating the legend while leaving its truth unresolved. Visitors come to see artifacts, read witness statements, and attend panels discussing possible extraterrestrial connections. Tourism has become intertwined with the town's identity, as businesses and locals embrace the allure of the mysterious. Yet, beneath the commercialized events, the original tension lingers. Unanswered questions, missing evidence, and the faint traces of something unexplainable that touched the community and the imagination of the wider world. Conversations with locals often drift to whispers of sightings and unexplained events, a testament to the persistence of memory and rumor over decades. Children are told stories passed down from parents, neighbors share fleeting glimpses of lights, and casual mentions of unusual activity persist in everyday conversation. Even with modern analysis, the desert's openness and the town's history keep speculation alive, blending folklore, personal experience, and official records. The mixture of fact and mystery has become part of Roswell's identity, shaping perceptions of both history and the unknowable. Some truths about Roswell may never be revealed, leaving the town's skies eternally shadowed by questions that refuse to settle. Villisca, the axe murders and the house that remains. June 10, 1912 dawned quietly over Villisca, yet the town's calm was shattered when neighbours noticed an unsettling stillness emanating from the Moore household. Children played along the dusty streets while adults went about their chores, but the usual sounds of domestic life seemed absent from the modest white house on the corner. Concerned, a few neighbours approached and peered inside, immediately sensing that something was profoundly wrong. The air was heavy, and the early sunlight revealed shadows that seemed sharper than normal, casting a strange solemnity over the rooms that hinted at a tragedy already beyond comprehension. The discovery of the family's lifeless bodies inside the house shocked everyone who entered, their positions eerily arranged as if the night's events had frozen time itself. Each occupant lay in the room where they had presumably gone to bed, their forms unremarkable in repose, but utterly unnatural in stillness. The visitor children were nearby, a silent echo of innocence abruptly silenced. Windows were closed, doors locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. Even seasoned law enforcement officers described an immediate chill, a sense that the violence was both intimate and deliberate, calculated to terrify the town that had always felt safe. Josiah Moore, his wife, and their 4 children, along with 2 visiting friends, were found together, and the domestic scene betrayed no sign of struggle beyond the fatal wounds, intensifying the town's horror. It appeared as though the family had been attacked in the most private of settings, their final moments preserved within familiar surroundings. Clothing remained in place, personal belongings scattered minimally, and the house bore no evidence of theft. This meticulous yet violent act perplexed investigators, as the combination of careful placement and brutal execution suggested an awareness of the household's routines and the presence of its inhabitants, magnifying the sense of intrusion and malevolence. Police officers began documenting the crime scene meticulously, examining the rooms, noting footprints, and cataloguing objects while struggling to make sense of the brutality they encountered. Investigators photographed each room, sketched layouts, and recorded every observable detail, yet each measurement and note seemed only to underscore the incomprehensible nature of the events. Neighbours were questioned, and search patterns extended beyond the house itself, but nothing suggested an obvious suspect or a clear motive. The tension in Villisca escalated as the reality of the murders settled into daily consciousness, leaving the town in a liminal space between grief, fear, and disbelief. Among the evidence, the murder weapon, a common household axe, stood out for its lethal use and the absence of fingerprints that could identify the killer. Found in the master bedroom, the blade bore traces of the victim's blood, its handle wiped clean or untouched, suggesting either careful planning or an almost clinical execution. Investigators noted the simplicity of the weapon contrasted against the magnitude of the crime, raising questions about premeditation, opportunity, and the psychological state of the assailant. The axe, ordinary in appearance yet extraordinary in consequence, became a grim symbol of the violence that had intruded upon this ordinary Midwestern home. Neighbours recalled hearing little more than faint sounds during the night, strange knocks, or movements that, in retrospect, hinted at the presence of someone unknown nearby. Some reported glimpsing a shadow crossing a window or hearing a step on the porch, details that seemed insignificant at the time but gained weight in the morning's revelation. These minor observations created a network of uneasy testimonies that hinted at intrusion without giving investigators a clear trail. Villagers described a lingering sense of something amiss, a quiet premonition that the world of domestic safety had been shattered and replaced with the uncanny, leaving an invisible residue of fear over the town. Suspects were questioned over days and weeks, ranging from local townspeople to itinerants passing through, yet every lead proved inconclusive, leaving investigators frustrated and the case unresolved. Each individual was scrutinized, yet alibis, motives, and behaviors failed to provide certainty. Community tension intensified as gossip and rumor intertwined with official procedures, and some residents became reluctant to speak at all, fearing that any misstep might implicate them. Despite the thorough work of authorities, the identity of the perpetrator remained hidden, as though the violence had left no trace except memory, speculation, and a trail of unanswered questions. Court proceedings captured national attention, and journalists reported on the trial with both fascination and unease, emphasizing the mystery while the evidence remained circumstantial at best. Papers across the United States chronicled every development, framing Villisca as a town touched by incomprehensible horror. Legal arguments attempted to reconstruct the night, but witnesses' statements often conflicted, and no one could account for every action or presence. The trial, while exhaustive, did little to assuage fear. Instead, it amplified the perception of something deliberately unknowable. The community watched as justice pursued shadows, leaving the case suspended between the known and the impossible. The house itself, left largely untouched in the aftermath, became a silent witness to the violence, its rooms preserved with a deliberate attention that haunted anyone who entered. Carpets, furniture, and personal items remained in place, creating a tableau that visitors described as chillingly intimate. Investigators and later caretakers found the arrangement of beds and household objects particularly unsettling, as though the space itself remembered the acts committed within it. The preservation transformed the home into a living memorial of horror, where visitors could confront the physical manifestation of tragedy and imagine the final moments of those who had once filled the rooms with life. Over the years, visitors and caretakers reported strange phenomena, unexplained footsteps, fleeting shadows, and the sensation that the home retained some memory of that fateful night. Some heard whispers in empty rooms or doors closing without cause, while others described cold spots or a subtle unease that intensified in certain areas of the house. Paranormal enthusiasts documented these occurrences, contributing to the house's reputation as haunted, but skeptics noted that the human imagination often fills the gaps left by incomplete understanding. Nevertheless, the repeated accounts established a persistent narrative of the house itself being an active participant in the ongoing mystery. Paranormal investigators and historians arrived decades later, examining every corner, interviewing locals, and recording eerie sounds, yet the house refused to yield definitive explanations. Instruments captured subtle anomalies, and photographs occasionally revealed inexplicable distortions, but conclusive proof remained elusive. Researchers debated whether the reported phenomena were residual energy, human projection, or coincidence, yet the house consistently drew attention and speculation. Each investigation added to the lore, deepening the intersection of factual history and legend, while preserving the tension between what could be verified and what remained beyond comprehension. The story of Villisca permeated popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and discussions that blurred the line between historical crime and the supernatural. Authors recounted the murders with dramatic detail, often emphasizing the house's eerie preservation and the unsolved nature of the crime. Documentaries recreated the events, combining archival records, witness testimony, and contemporary investigation, highlighting the enduring fascination of a small town suddenly marked by horror. Public imagination found fertile ground in the combination of brutal crime, preserved domestic space, and unexplained phenomena, ensuring that Villisca's story remained both historical record and legend. Townspeople and descendants recounted how fear lingered long after the murders, shaping behaviours, oral histories, and a collective memory that never fully reconciled the atrocity. Some families avoided the area at night, while others kept children indoors or refrained from discussing the events. These habits, though subtle, revealed the psychological impact that crime can have on a community over decades. Memory intertwined with rumour, shaping identity and daily life, as Villisca became a place where the past and its lingering terror refused to be fully dismissed or forgotten. Preservation of the Moore House became both a tribute and a challenge, balancing the need for historical accuracy with the dark fascination of visitors drawn to its unresolved terror. Curators and caretakers maintained the rooms, keeping furniture and layouts intact while presenting interpretive materials for the curious. Visitors were guided carefully, instructed to respect the space, yet many left with a profound sense of unease. The ethical complexities of showcasing such a site highlighted the tension between remembrance, education, and the public appetite for confronting unresolved evil firsthand. Despite extensive research and speculation, questions remain about the killer's identity, motives, and the circumstances that allowed such horror to unfold in a quiet Midwestern town. Theories abound, from the plausible to the extraordinary, yet none satisfy fully. Diaries, letters, and reports offer fragments of insight, but the central mystery endures, resilient against decades of scrutiny. Villisca itself became a vessel for collective imagination, a small town holding the echoes of an event that continues to provoke fear, curiosity, and fascination. The Villisca house endures, silent yet accusatory, as if it alone remembers the terror that no record or testimony can ever fully capture. Sleepy Hollow, legends that outlived the Headless Horseman. Even on the quietest mornings, Sleepy Hollow carries an almost tangible weight, as though centuries of whispered tales have settled into the very air along its narrow lanes. The streets, lined with old stone walls and gnarled trees, seem to hold on to echoes of the past, where ordinary life mingled with unease. Locals speak of an atmosphere that is both familiar and slightly off-kilter, as though the town itself remembers events that occurred long before any visitor arrived. In this small New York village, history and legend interlace, creating a space where reality is never entirely certain. Long before the town became famous, Dutch settlers cultivated the land along the Hudson River, leaving behind not only farms but stories of strange noises and flickering shadows in the dense woods. Journals and letters from the 17th and 18th centuries mention villagers wary of nighttime activity, unexplained sounds, and glimpses of figures that no one could account for. These reports, though sporadic and fragmented, created a foundation for a folklore steeped in caution and imagination. Sleepy Hollow's early residents were keenly aware of their surroundings, yet even their attentiveness could not fully dispel the unease that lingered in the misty valley. Washington Irving's pen transformed local whispers into legend, casting a spectral rider across the countryside and ensuring that Sleepy Hollow's name would echo far beyond its borders. His 1820 story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, wove together factual geography, local names, and the mysterious personality of the town to craft a tale that blurred the lines between reality and fiction. Ichabod Crane, Katrina Van Tassel, and the enigmatic headless horseman became enduring symbols, while Irving's work elevated the ordinary landscapes and bridges of the Hudson Valley into sites of suspense and imagination. The narrative itself became inseparable from the town it portrayed. Some accounts from the early 1800s describe neighbours glimpsing fleeting figures atop horses at twilight, moments so brief they could be dismissed, yet collectively persistent across decades. Farmers travelling along unpaved roads sometimes reported hearing the gallop of hooves behind them, only to find empty fields when they turned. Children told of distant shapes in the fog, and merchants noted doors swinging as if unseen hands had passed by. While these experiences were inconsistent and anecdotal, the sheer repetition over time instilled a cautious reverence among locals, reinforcing the sense that Sleepy Hollow was a place where ordinary perceptions could not always be trusted. Residents have long reported sensations of unease in the darkened hollows near the Old Dutch Church, claiming sudden chills, rustling footsteps, and the occasional glimpse of a rider's silhouette. Gravestones and crypts, weathered by wind and rain, became points of heightened attention, as though certain locations were more susceptible to the lingering presence of the unknown. Some visitors claimed to hear muffled voices calling names or abrupt knocks on doors when no one was present. Each report, small in isolation, contributed to a cumulative tension, creating an atmosphere in which even the familiar felt slightly wrong when shadows stretched across the worn paths of the cemetery. Into the 20th century, visitors and townspeople alike continued to recount eerie encounters. Hooves striking the earth in the mist, eyes glinting in the night, and whispers carried on the wind. The legend adapted to changing times, with automobiles replacing horses, yet strange sound persisted in remote areas. Local newspapers occasionally reported sightings, blending journalistic caution with an undercurrent of intrigue, while travellers wrote letters describing their own inexplicable experiences. Sleepy Hollow became a place where skepticism coexisted uneasily with belief, and even those who dismissed ghosts found themselves pausing when the fog thickened and the woods fell silent. Certain landmarks, the churchyard, Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and the bridges crossing the Pocantico River, have become central to these accounts, lending tangible geography to tales of the supernatural. Each site carries its own lore: gravestones rumoured to bleed in moonlight, riverbanks where shadows move unnaturally, and bridges associated with spectral appearances of riders. Visitors often seek these locations to test their own courage, while locals treat them with a mixture of respect and apprehension. The physicality of these places grounds the stories, providing anchor points where the town's legends intersect with the everyday landscape. Stories of odd happenings ripple outward through community memory, as locals exchange warnings and recollections, each retelling reshaping the narrative while reinforcing the town's mystique. In taverns, bakeries, and schools, generations have passed down accounts that shift subtly with each telling. Certain details, such as the exact time of night or the appearance of the spectral rider, evolve, creating variations that sustain mystery. Despite inconsistencies, the stories converge on a central truth. Sleepy Hollow is a place where the ordinary is never entirely safe from the uncanny, and even mundane experiences carry the possibility of an unseen presence. Autumn evenings, when fog drifts across the fields and moonlight fractures through skeletal branches, seem to intensify the uncanny experiences reported by both residents and travellers. The seasonal air, damp and cool, carries sounds differently, amplifying distant footsteps and whispering leaves. Lanterns cast long, trembling shadows along narrow roads, and reflective surfaces sometimes reveal movements that vanish when approached. Visitors often note a heightened awareness during this time of year, a subtle tension that evokes the tales of Ichabod Crane and the Headless Horseman without requiring active imagination, as the landscape itself seems to become a participant in the enduring legend. The interplay of literature and reality creates a peculiar ambiguity, as those familiar with Irving's tale often interpret ordinary sights and sounds through the lens of legend. A shadow across a fence, a sudden gust of wind, or a distant horse's snort can provoke vivid recollections of the story. Residents, aware of the legend's influence, sometimes observe outsiders' reactions and wonder whether the town itself is merely an imagined stage. This constant negotiation between lived experience and literary expectation sustains a unique tension in which Sleepy Hollow exists simultaneously as a tangible village and as the mythic space created by one of America's earliest enduring ghost stories. Paranormal investigators and ghost tour guides document phenomena with audio devices and cameras, yet what they capture rarely satisfies the rational mind, leaving speculation and wonder in equal measure. Instruments record faint noises, sudden temperature shifts, or unexplained lights, yet each result is contested or dismissed by skeptics. The town's embrace of tours and study maintains a delicate balance between entertainment, investigation, and cultural preservation. For visitors, the experience is immersive. They walk the same paths as characters from Irving's story, crossing bridges and approaching cemeteries while feeling the weight of history and legend, coalescing in ways that defy complete explanation. The psychological influence of repeated stories manifests subtly, shaping perception and expectation, and sometimes making even the mundane streets feel fraught with unseen presence. Residents report an unspoken awareness that guides behaviour, avoiding certain routes at night, lowering voices near grave markers, or hesitating at fog-laden intersections. Children grow up with tales that condition imagination, blending fear and fascination in equal measure. Sleepy Hollow's collective consciousness has absorbed these narratives over centuries, embedding unease into the rhythms of daily life and ensuring that the legend functions not just as a story but as a subtle force shaping human experience. Tourist events, festivals, and the commercialization of the town's ghostly history have perpetuated Sleepy Hollow's eerie reputation, intertwining local culture with ongoing fascination. The village hosts annual Halloween celebrations, reenactments of the Headless Horseman, and guided night tours that attract thousands of visitors. Shops and museums display artifacts, replicas, and historical documents, sustaining a tangible connection between legend and reality. While some view this attention as kitsch, the events reinforce the town's narrative, allowing visitors and residents alike to engage with both history and folklore, maintaining the legend's vitality across generations. Even with extensive research and documentation, the town's stories resist full explanation, leaving a tension between recorded history and the eerie accounts that persist. Scholars and historians compile archives, study old maps, and analyze local records, yet questions remain about early sightings, unexplained noises, and the endurance of specific legends. Each attempt to clarify the past reveals new uncertainties, illustrating how folklore and fact coexist in Sleepy Hollow. The unresolved nature of these accounts ensures that the town's mysteries remain active, inviting speculation and keeping the story alive long after the first printing of Irving's tale. Sleepy Hollow endures not merely as a physical place, but as a convergence of memory, literature, and perception, where each visitor becomes part of an evolving story. The village's streets, bridges, and cemeteries hold layers of narrative accumulated over centuries, where history and legend interact continuously. Locals inherit the legacy, while visitors contribute their own experiences, shaping the ongoing mythology. The town exists in a liminal space, tangible yet infused with imagination, and each new recounting reinforces the persistent sense that Sleepy Hollow is a place where stories live independently of those who first told them. The shadow of the Headless Horseman rides on in imagination and memory, forever restless beneath the quiet streets of Sleepy Hollow. Jerome, the mining town that wouldn't empty quietly. Empty storefronts and boarded-up homes line the steep streets of Jerome, their silent facades holding on to whispers of the miners and families who once filled every corner with life. The narrow alleys and cobbled paths wind around the hills, guiding the eye toward rusting water towers and shuttered hotels, all remnants of a town that once pulsed with human ambition. Even now, the town exudes an uncanny energy, a tension that seems to hover in the air, as if the very walls remember the clang of tools, the chatter of families, and the heavy footfalls of miners descending into the dark shafts. Founded on the promise of abundant copper veins, the town quickly swelled with miners, entrepreneurs, and families, each contributing to a complex social tapestry amidst the rugged hills of Arizona. Boarding houses accommodated transient workers, while saloons offered escape from the grueling labor underground. Blacksmiths, general stores, and schools appeared almost overnight, fostering a community dependent on the earth and one another. Life in Jerome was precarious yet vibrant, the copper industry dictating both prosperity and hardship. While legends of accidents, daring rescues, and occasional disappearances circulated among residents, laying the groundwork for the town's lingering aura of mystery. When copper prices collapsed, waves of residents departed almost overnight, leaving behind homes, shops, and mines that seemed to resist emptiness, their walls silently recording the abrupt departure. Furniture remained where it had been used, personal belongings were often left behind, and signage still advertised services for people who would never return. The streets, once alive with voices, now reverberated with echoes of absence. Locals describe an uncanny feeling of being watched by unseen presences, as though the departing miners' lives had imprinted themselves on the town. Jerome's decline was abrupt, and the town never truly shed the memory of its bustling past. Hotels and boarding houses, long since closed, still bear the marks of hurried abandonment, with personal effects frozen in place and furniture gathering dust in forgotten corners. Dining tables remain set as if awaiting guests, curtains hang unevenly as if hastily drawn, and the scent of age permeates every hallway. These structures are haunted less by spirits than by the weight of human memory. Visitors often report a sense of being accompanied, subtle footsteps on empty floors, or glimpses of movement from the corner of the eye, though no one is present. The buildings themselves seem to act as custodians of stories long past. Visitors and local caretakers occasionally recount strange creaks, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, or flickering lights that defy logical explanation in buildings long abandoned. At night, even minor tremors from the surrounding hills can create noises amplified in silent rooms, yet many insist they experience more than ordinary structural sounds. Tourists have described cold spots in rooms, sudden drafts that do not correspond to openings, and the sensation of being followed down hallways. Each incident, though isolated, reinforces the sense that Jerome is alive in memory and perception, a town suspended between abandonment and lingering energy. Tales persist of miners' spirits, said to linger near collapsed shafts or old equipment, their presence whispered about during tours and late-night explorations. Stories recount shadowy figures in helmets, faintly glowing eyes amid tunnels, or the distant clatter of tools from empty mines. Though largely anecdotal, these accounts contribute to a collective understanding of Jerome as a place where history and the supernatural intersect. The miners' reputations, bravery, and occasional misfortune continue to echo through the hills, manifesting in ways that science and logic struggle to explain, leaving the town in a liminal space between reality and legend. After dusk, the town's streets take on an uncanny quality, shadows stretching unnaturally along brick facades, and the wind carrying noises that hint at past activity. Street lamps cast uneven pools of light, revealing textures in weathered stone and peeling paint that evoke the passage of decades. Visitors moving slowly along the steep streets often report sudden sensations of being watched, and some describe inexplicable flickers of movement on upper balconies. Jerome's landscape interacts with the imagination, turning ordinary architectural features into sources of suspense, and the combination of emptiness, history, and uneven terrain amplifies an almost tactile tension. Rusted tools, abandoned machinery, and faded signage provide tangible reminders of lives interrupted, creating a sense that the town itself guards memories too heavy to vanish. Minecarts sit immobile, pulley systems hang idle, and signage warning of dangerous shafts seems to carry an almost sacred weight. These artifacts bridge past and present, inviting visitors to consider the people who lived and worked here, the hazards they faced, and the abrupt departures that left objects untouched. Each item in its decay becomes evidence of both human ambition and the fragility of life tethered to an unforgiving landscape. Tourists often find themselves uneasy as they navigate steep streets lined with weathered buildings, sensing the weight of history pressing silently on every step. The combination of abandoned structures, lingering legends, and narrow winding roads creates an immersive tension. Photographers pause at the sight of broken windows that reflect eerie shadows, and hikers report feeling inexplicable chills near old mining entrances. Even daytime visitors comment on the town's strange ambience, noting that the sense of observation, whether real or imagined, seems to emanate from walls, staircases, and the earth itself, as if Jerome refuses to release its past. The surrounding hills amplify wind and environmental sounds, turning ordinary creaks or gusts into phenomena interpreted as supernatural by the imagination. Rocks shifting on slopes, the whistle of wind through empty chimneys, and the distant groan of timbers produce auditory effects that unsettle even skeptical observers. Locals have long described nights where the combined influence of terrain, echo, and memory creates a nearly tangible tension. These environmental factors, while explainable in part by physics, also serve as a conduit for legend, embedding Jerome's eerie reputation into both soundscape and perception. Conflicting eyewitness accounts describe figures glimpsed in windows, shadows moving across corridors, and sudden unexplained disturbances, leaving ambiguity firmly intact. Photographs occasionally capture inexplicable blurs, reflections that cannot be accounted for, and doors that appear ajar when they were securely closed. Each account, differing in detail and perspective, contributes to the overarching sense that Jerome retains fragments of its former life in ways that defy complete rationalization. These discrepancies deepen the mystery, allowing the town to maintain its allure as a place of both historical significance and ongoing intrigue. The psychological imprint of isolation is evident, as the town's near-deserted landscape can make even ordinary objects seem imbued with purpose or watchfulness. Empty streets, long stairways, and shuttered windows create a constant tension between perception and reality. Visitors and locals alike report heightened awareness, a subtle anticipation that something might move or appear unexpectedly. Jerome's abandoned spaces act almost like a mirror, reflecting individual anxieties and expectations, while reinforcing the legend of a town that refuses to settle into true silence, ensuring suspense remains part of daily life. Attempts at repopulation by artists, historians, and small business owners have brought new energy, yet traces of past lives remain in rooms, alleys, and mine shafts. Studios occupy former boarding houses, cafes open in old saloons, and museums interpret mining history. Yet the interplay between life and residual memory is palpable. New residents often remark on feelings of unease and unexpected sounds, while maintaining fascination with the town's texture. Jerome's dual existence, alive and echoing with history, demonstrates how human presence, even when restored in small numbers, cannot entirely dispel the lingering weight of abandonment. Unresolved mysteries, sudden structural collapses, faint lights at night, and reports of whispering voices ensure Jerome never fully sheds its reputation as a town that harbours secrets. Miners' letters, photographs, and local folklore intermingle, creating multiple layers of narrative that resist simplification. Even professionals documenting the town for historical purposes occasionally note inexplicable anomalies. Each new report, however minor, adds to the cumulative tension, reinforcing the town's character as a space in which history, memory, and subtle phenomena converge to create an enduring sense of uncertainty and intrigue. The town endures as a living relic, its empty streets and weathered buildings serving as silent witnesses to human ambition, error, and persistence. Every corner tells a story, from collapsed shafts to rusting signage, and every creaking floorboard carries echoes of lives once intertwined with the earth beneath. Jerome's narrative is not confined to history books, but is embedded in the town's physicality, atmosphere, and ongoing experiences of visitors and locals alike. The persistence of memory, legend, and mystery ensures that Jerome continues to captivate the imagination long after its heyday. Even as new life trickles into Jerome, the echoes of miners, hurried departures, and unseen presences continue to haunt its hollowed streets. Dudleytown, the village that vanished into silence. Stone foundations peek through dense undergrowth, marking the spots where Dudleytown settlers once attempted to forge a thriving community, now largely forgotten. Remnants of homes, mills, and barns are barely visible beneath a tangled forest, their outlines offering a fragmented map of human ambition swallowed by time. The uneven terrain, steep hills, and shadowed hollows create an immediate sense of unease, as if the land itself has absorbed the weight of generations. Even today, visitors remark on the silence, a quiet so profound that ordinary noises, wind, birds, footsteps seem amplified, yet somehow hollow, reinforcing the town's ghostly presence. Early colonists sought to cultivate the land and harness local streams, but steep hills, rocky soil, and unpredictable weather thwarted their best-laid plans. Fields planted with hopes of sustaining families often yielded little, and the streams that promised irrigation proved fickle and inconsistent. Diaries and land records document the frustration of these settlers, whose efforts were repeatedly undermined by conditions beyond their control. Some attempted small mills or timber operations, hoping to diversify livelihoods, yet nature and misfortune repeatedly intervened. Dudleytown, though a deliberate effort at settlement, became a place that seemed predisposed to failure, its very geography a subtle adversary to human persistence. One by one, families abandoned their homesteads, leaving behind tools, hearths, and fragments of daily life that would remain undisturbed for decades. Personal belongings, from cast iron stoves to handmade furniture, were often left as is, creating a silent archive of vanished lives. Paths once walked daily quickly disappeared under moss and saplings, erasing evidence of movement and connection. Reports suggest that the departures were rarely sudden, yet the cumulative effect was a town slowly fading from both memory and map. The forest crept inward, reclaiming the village while keeping traces of its former residents just barely visible to those who dared explore its depths. Weathered beams and crumbling walls offer silent testimony to the village's repeated failures, their decay echoing the unfulfilled ambitions of those who once lived there. Roofs collapsed decades ago, chimneys lean precariously, and foundations are fractured by shifting soil. These physical remnants convey the story of Dudleytown more vividly than any document. They speak of toil, hope, and the inexorable passage of time. Visitors often remark on the unsettling sense that the ruins are watching, a perception heightened by shadows, uneven terrain, and the pervasive silence that fills the hollows. The structures, though lifeless, act as conduits for history, memory, and subtle unease. The surrounding forest seems almost alive, swallowing paths and ruins alike, and creating an atmosphere of subtle menace that unsettles even the most confident explorers. Trees tower over collapsed homes, their roots forcing apart stone foundations, and thick underbrush hides remnants of fences and gardens. Wildlife movements are amplified in the stillness, producing sudden rustles or glimpses of motion that hint at more than mere animals. Mist and humidity collect in valleys, softening the landscape yet adding an eerie quality that feels purposeful, as if the environment conspires to maintain the village's silence. Every step seems to provoke the forest into response, reinforcing the sense that Dudleytown remains vigilant. Modern visitors often report a sense of unease upon entering the site, describing fleeting shadows, muffled sounds, or inexplicable chills that cling to the air. Hikers recount moments when compass needles waver, phones fail, or paths seem unfamiliar despite careful planning. Even those skeptical of superstition acknowledge that the combination of isolation, environmental factors, and human imagination produces a tangible tension. Guides sometimes share stories of figures glimpsed between trees or faint voices on the wind, yet no verifiable evidence exists. These experiences, while anecdotal, accumulate into a collective understanding that Dudleytown exerts a psychological weight disproportionate to its abandoned structures. Isolation amplifies perception, and the village's reputation as cursed or restless leaves an imprint on those who walk among its foundations. Awareness heightens, footsteps feel heavier, and ordinary sounds become ominous. Scholars and visitors alike comment on a sense of being followed, observed, or subtly influenced by the environment. The absence of active life magnifies every signal, creating a liminal space where human senses strain to interpret the ambiguous. Dudleytown, though silent, exerts agency through atmosphere, topography, and memory, leaving those who enter to confront not only the village's ruins, but also their own anticipation and fear. Local legends tell of misfortune and sudden illness befalling anyone attempting to make Dudleytown their home, stories passed down through neighbouring towns. Accounts vary from disease outbreaks to unexplained accidents or persistent bad luck, forming a web of cautionary tales. While the historical accuracy of these events is mixed, they contribute to the village's aura of dread. Visitors are warned to respect boundaries, and signs note the private nature of the land, yet curiosity drives explorers into the forest. The combination of rumour, folklore, and documented hardship ensures that Dudleytown's ominous reputation extends beyond the physical site into cultural consciousness. Communities nearby maintain a cautious distance, reinforcing the village's eerie status and adding layers of social caution to the physical desolation. Residents of surrounding towns often avoid the forest entirely, passing on advice to outsiders or dismissing the area with uneasy laughter. Maps sometimes obscure the village, omitting its precise location or relegating it to faint annotations. Even historians and archaeologists approach Dudleytown with care, balancing research goals against the sense that intrusion is met with resistance, whether environmental, psychological, or, as some believe, supernatural. The village exists in the collective awareness of the region as a place best left to its silence. Collapsed chimneys, moss-covered stones, and long overgrown garden beds illustrate the relentless passage of time and nature's reclamation of human efforts. Paths once carefully cleared are now blocked by fallen branches, and remnants of fences are twisted by decades of growth. Every stone, timber, and trace of brick carries the imprint of labour, decay, and eventual surrender. Visitors are reminded that human endeavour, no matter how earnest, can be fleeting in the face of environmental persistence. The village's physical decay mirrors its historical disappearance, providing both a cautionary tale and a haunting aesthetic that draws the curious despite the warnings. Some hikers speak of inexplicable disorientation, fleeting glimpses of movement, or voices that seem to echo from empty foundations, though no evidence supports these phenomena. Trails wind unpredictably through undergrowth, creating the impression that the village shifts underfoot. Shadows play tricks on perception, especially during overcast days or foggy mornings. Even experienced outdoorsmen report sensations of unease that cannot be explained by terrain alone. These encounters, subtle and fleeting, feed Dudleytown's mythos, reinforcing the sense that the village is not merely abandoned but subtly alive in ways that challenge rational understanding. Occasional attempts to map or study the village have yielded more questions than answers, as the forest and terrain obscure ruins and confound researchers. Archaeological teams note discrepancies between historical maps and present-day remnants, while drone surveys often fail to capture the full scope due to dense canopy. Attempts to date structures or artifacts sometimes produce inconclusive results, leaving the village's timeline partially obscured. Each new expedition uncovers fragments of foundations, stonework, or tools, yet the combination of environmental interference and limited documentation preserves Dudleytown's enigmatic character, ensuring that knowledge remains incomplete and speculation thrives. Dudleytown's story persists in historical records, maps, and folklore, creating a cultural imprint far beyond the physical site itself. Scholars note references in early New England town histories, local legends, and modern media accounts, which collectively sustain the village's reputation. The combination of documented hardship, abandoned ruins, and oral tradition embeds Dudleytown in public consciousness as a place of unresolved tension. Its existence as a cautionary symbol of human ambition, environmental challenge, and unexplained unease ensures that its legacy is not confined to the forested hollow where it physically resides. Even as the decades pass, the village resists erasure, leaving visitors and historians alike to wonder why this particular settlement remains both abandoned and memorable. The forest does not fully claim the space, and traces of human effort persist, from stone hearths to fragmentary cellar walls. Stories of misfortune, strange occurrences, and disorientation continue to circulate, giving the village an almost magnetic quality for those drawn to history or the mysterious. Dudleytown remains an anomaly, a testament to human ambition undone by circumstances beyond control, yet preserved in memory, legend, and the residual energy of place. The combination of environmental hostility, historical failure, and intangible unease ensures that Dudleytown retains its reputation as a place where silence is anything but ordinary. Hikers, historians, and casual visitors alike speak of a profound stillness that is both oppressive and captivating. The village's ruins, partially concealed beneath foliage, seem almost deliberate in their concealment, guarding secrets while provoking curiosity. Even the most skeptical find themselves affected by the weight of absence, the complexity of history, and the subtle suggestion that Dudleytown has never fully relinquished the lives it once held. For those who venture within its shadowed boundaries, Dudleytown remains a place where the past lingers stubbornly, and the reasons for its disappearance continue to defy explanation. St. Augustine, America's oldest city and its restless corners. History lingers in the heavy air of St. Augustine, as centuries of human endeavour leave subtle traces that seem to observe every passerby. The city's streets hum with layers of existence long past, where Spanish garrisons, colonial settlers, and generations of residents moved, laboured, and left behind objects, architecture, and impressions that continue to whisper to those who pay attention. Tourists and historians alike describe an almost imperceptible tension in the air, a sense that the city itself has memory. Cobblestone paths and narrow lanes carry echoes of conversations, footsteps, and the occasional mysterious shadow, grounding the city's age in an atmosphere that feels alive with unresolved stories. Even without overt supernatural events, St. Augustine possesses a quiet, pervasive unease, as if the weight of centuries has left a residue capable of subtle, yet undeniable influence. The city's earlier settlers endured hurricanes, conflicts, and disease, their struggles recorded in letters and colonial documents that hint at an uneasy past. Spaniards arrived in 1565, establishing what is now considered the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the United States. Their records reveal frequent skirmishes with indigenous populations, repeated threats from rival European powers, and devastating epidemics that decimated early colonists. Each of these challenges left traces not only in written accounts, but in the cultural memory of the city. Even today, researchers note that St. Augustine's layered history contributes to an atmosphere where the present and past seem to coexist uneasily, lending credence to reports of subtle, unexplained phenomena. Castillo de San Marcos stands as both fortress and silent witness, its stone walls bearing the weight of battles and whispered tales of lingering presence. Constructed from coquina stone, the fort absorbed cannon fire during sieges yet endured intact, a testament to both its architecture and the history it encapsulates. Visitors occasionally report feelings of sudden cold, disorientation, or the impression of unseen eyes following their movements along its ramparts. While skeptics attribute such sensations to psychology or drafts in old stone structures, historians and paranormal enthusiasts alike acknowledge that the fort's long history of conflict and human presence contributes to an unmistakable tension permeating the air. Shifts between Spanish, British, and American control left traces not only in architecture, but in the city's collective memory, seeding uncertainty and tension among its residents. Each transition involved not only political maneuvering but also displacement, cultural upheaval, and occasionally violence. Buildings were repurposed or abandoned, citizens adapted to new rulers, and the sense of impermanence layered itself over centuries-old streets. This repeated cycle of dominance and change is often cited as a reason for the city's persistent aura of unease, as if the human energy invested in these transitions continues to reverberate in certain neighbourhoods long after the original participants are gone. Narrow alleys and historic homes carry stories of vanished occupants, strange noises, and sudden cold spots reported by those who explore the quieter corners. The Spanish Quarter in particular is known for accounts of fleeting shapes glimpsed in doorways, the unexplained creaking of floorboards, and the sensation of being watched. Some visitors describe whispers carried on the wind or faint lights flickering where none should exist. While folklore and local legend embellish these accounts, multiple eyewitnesses have documented unusual experiences that defy easy explanation, suggesting that the city's structures themselves may be vessels for echoes of past lives. Cultural layers of Spanish, African, and indigenous heritage converge in St. Augustine, creating a dense tapestry where legend and fact intertwine with disquieting subtlety. African slaves brought their spiritual practices, indigenous groups maintained long-standing traditions, and Spanish settlers imposed European rituals. The intersection of these traditions produced a city where different forms of belief and memory coexist uneasily. Scholars of folklore note that stories of apparitions, phantom footsteps, and sudden chills often emerge in locations where cultural influences overlap, hinting at a persistent, almost tangible layering of human experience. Tourists often recount fleeting glimpses of figures in historic plazas or unexpected chills along the bayfront, experiences that resist easy explanation. Ghost tours, while sometimes theatrical, are anchored in accounts of real witnesses who describe seeing silhouettes vanish into alleys or hearing faint conversations in empty courtyards. Even those not seeking the supernatural report subtle disturbances, a lamp flickering, a shadow moving independently of its source, or a sudden shift in temperature, that linger in memory long after their visit. Such reports reinforce the perception of St. Augustine as a city where the past has not entirely released its hold. Graveyards such as Tolomato and Huguenot preserve both history and rumour, their aged markers suggesting a tension between memory and lingering presence. Tolomato Cemetery, originally established for the local Spanish Catholic population, contains tombs dating back centuries, some of which record untimely deaths from disease or maritime accidents. Huguenot Cemetery holds the remains of Protestant settlers who arrived later, their gravestones inscribed with the shorthand of grief and faith. Visitors report the sensation of being observed, of faint footsteps on gravel paths, and occasionally of voices or music heard where no living person is present. The cemetery's quiet stillness magnifies the sense that history is not entirely inert. The nearby coastline has claimed countless ships, and local law insists that storms, fog, and strange lights sometimes accompany maritime tragedies. Shipwrecks off the Florida coast, documented from the 16th century onward, produced fatalities, lost cargo, and enduring grief, creating fertile ground for ghost stories. Some fishermen and locals claim to see spectral vessels or lights dancing across the water on calm nights, experiences that correlate with historically significant wreck sites. These maritime mysteries blend documented events with folklore, reinforcing the city's reputation as a place where the natural and supernatural coexist. Fort gates, narrow passages, and winding streets subtly guide the flow of visitors, shaping the perception of space and amplifying the city's sense of lingering watchfulness. Tour guides often note that seemingly ordinary paths lead to unexpected views, hidden courtyards, or quiet alcoves, all of which have histories of both ordinary and unusual events. The urban layout, unchanged in many areas since the 18th century, encourages a slow, contemplative exploration that can make ordinary sounds, shadows, and reflections appear uncanny. Visitors frequently describe a sensation of being gently guided by unseen hands, moving them through a city shaped as much by history as by its physical design. As twilight falls, the city transforms. Familiar landmarks acquire unfamiliar angles, shadows stretch unpredictably, and the ordinary takes on an unnerving quality. Evening air carries scents of the sea, the old wood of buildings, and distant smoke from historical reenactments, layering sensory input that can heighten awareness. Tourists often remark that the city feels entirely different at night, more intimate yet heavier with an unseen presence. This temporal shift reinforces the notion that St. Augustine is a living archive, one in which daylight eases perceptions, but darkness restores memory to its fullest intensity. Oral traditions, whispered tales, and recurring ghost stories preserve a sense of St. Augustine as a place where history and the unexplained coexist uneasily. Residents recount stories passed down for generations, a woman glimpsed in a window long after sunset, footsteps along deserted docks, or the sudden appearance of a figure in colonial attire. These accounts, though anecdotal, are remarkably consistent across decades, suggesting that the city's unique blend of history, architecture, and human memory supports a persistent narrative of unease. Diaries, newspapers, and archival records recount mysterious events, unexplained fires, sudden illness, and spectral sightings, without straying from verifiable documentation. Local historians have noted entries in 19th century newspapers describing strange noises in the plaza, fires that resisted conventional explanations, and shadows glimpsed in public squares. While contemporary analysis often seeks rational explanations, the persistence of these reports in official records demonstrates that St. Augustine's atmosphere of mystery has roots in documented reality rather than mere invention. Scholars and locals alike reflect on the city's capacity to evoke unease, noting that centuries of layered history continue to influence contemporary perceptions. Researchers studying historical psychology, urban folklore, and cultural memory emphasize that the density of human experience in St. Augustine produces measurable responses, a heightened awareness of movement, subtle shifts in mood, and occasional reports of anomalous phenomena. These studies suggest that the city's long, complicated past continues to shape the present, producing an environment where the ordinary can feel inexplicably charged with history. Even centuries after its founding, St. Augustine maintains an air of restless persistence, as if the city itself remembers every shadow and whispered secret. From colonial fortresses to narrow alleyways, the interplay of memory, architecture, and human experience makes the city feel inhabited beyond the number of living residents. Local guides, historians, and visitors alike acknowledge a subtle but pervasive sensation that the city's past is not merely preserved but continues to exert influence on those who walk its streets, see its facades and hear its sounds. The city's restless nature is not always obvious, yet it can be felt by those who linger long enough to notice the weight of centuries pressing against the present. Even in the quietest corners of St. Augustine, the weight of centuries presses down, leaving a sense that the city's stories are far from finished. Eureka Springs, healing waters, and hidden tunnels. Visitors arrived in Eureka Springs seeking cures, drawn by the promise of mineral waters that had earned a reputation as miraculous. Word spread quickly through the region that the springs could alleviate ailments ranging from arthritis to digestive disorders, luring a mixture of hopeful patients and curious onlookers. In the late 19th century, the town's Victorian charm, ornate hotels, winding streets, and elaborate bathhouses blended seamlessly with the air of mystery that seemed to hang over the constantly flowing waters. Even on bright afternoons, there was a subtle hush, as if the town itself held its breath, keeping secrets just below the surface. Early settlers documented the springs meticulously, recording their flow, temperature, and mineral composition, while noting claims of inexplicable recoveries. Journals from the 1870s describe visitors reporting sudden relief from chronic pain or mysterious improvements in their health, sometimes within a matter of days. Local physicians were often puzzled, caught between scientific skepticism and the repeated testimonies of those who had travelled hundreds of miles for treatment. The careful measurements and careful notation of mineral content painted a picture of a town whose allure was both scientific and uncanny, a place where empirical observation and rumour intertwined seamlessly. Victorian-era tourism transformed the town into a vibrant destination, where boarding houses, bathhouses, and ornamental fountains suggested both health and sophistication. Wealthy visitors came to take the waters, strolling along wooden boardwalks and attending social gatherings meant to promote both leisure and wellness. The streets were alive with the music of horse-drawn carriages and the laughter of tourists, yet beneath this lively exterior a shadowed curiosity lingered, as if the town's outward charm masked hidden layers that few dared explore. Local guides would hint at corners of the town where mysteries lingered, but rarely offered specifics, allowing imagination to fill the gaps. Rumours circulated about strange occurrences during these visits, from sudden fainting spells to inexplicable sensations in certain spring waters. A guest at one hotel recalled feeling a chill while standing in the bathhouse, despite the warmth of the mineral water, and hearing faint whispers echoing from the adjoining hallways. Others reported seeing fleeting silhouettes at the edge of their vision, or experiencing a pressure on their chest that disappeared as suddenly as it appeared. Though these accounts were often dismissed at the time, they were preserved in diaries and newspapers, contributing to a persistent undercurrent of unease that seemed inseparable from the town itself. Reports of residents and visitors vanishing without explanation began appearing in newspapers and local accounts, lending an undertone of unease to the town's cheerful exterior. In several instances, people simply failed to check out of hotels, their rooms left untouched for weeks, while belongings remained scattered as if they had stepped out and never returned. Investigators noted no clear pattern, yet there were whispers of certain streets and spring-fed areas being particularly associated with these disappearances. The stories were enough to make cautious visitors glance over their shoulders, even as they marvelled at the town's apparent serenity. Hidden from sight, a network of tunnels extended in labyrinthine patterns, originally designed for water access and private passage between buildings. Constructed in the late 1800s, these passages were built beneath bathhouses and hotels, allowing staff to transport water discreetly and maintain the elaborate system of pipes that supplied the mineral springs. Over time, the tunnels became a repository for the town's darker stories. Forgotten items, abandoned tools, and even the occasional human tale whose details were too strange to record in official reports. Their twisting corridors seemed to mirror the town's dual nature, welcoming on the surface yet labyrinthine and secretive below. Many tunnels were connected to bathhouses and springs, their brick-lined corridors whispering tales of secret meetings, hidden supplies, and clandestine movement. Explorers noted that certain passageways appear to change subtly over the decades, either through deliberate modification or through natural shifting of the foundations. Some doors led to basements long abandoned, while others opened into caverns that seemed impossibly large, their ceilings vanishing into darkness. Even guides familiar with the tunnels admitted that no one could fully map their extent, leaving the underground world as a continuously unfolding enigma. People exploring the tunnels over the decades recounted disembodied voices, fleeting shapes, and cold drafts that seemed to originate from nowhere. Some reported the sensation of being watched, while others claimed that lantern light behaved oddly, flickering in patterns that suggested figures moving just out of view. Despite careful documentation of these experiences, no physical evidence could confirm the sightings, leaving a blend of fascination and apprehension in all who ventured below. The combination of architectural complexity and human imagination ensured that the tunnels retained a sense of living mystery, as if the town itself had a consciousness. In the early 20th century, tunnels facilitated illegal activities such as bootlegging and smuggling, leaving a history of secrecy etched into their walls. During Prohibition, residents discovered ingenious ways to use the underground corridors to conceal alcohol shipments from law enforcement. Stories of hidden stashes, secret codes, and narrow escapes became woven into the folklore of the town, creating an undercurrent of intrigue that persisted long after the laws changed. The tunnel's original utilitarian purpose had been overtaken by shadowy human intent, further deepening the sense of duality between light and darkness, surface and depth. Legends persist of shadowy figures and ghostly apparitions appearing where tunnels intersect or dead end, accounts consistently passed down by local guides and long-term residents. Visitors who dared to descend into these passages occasionally described seeing fleeting glimpses of figures that seemed both human and otherworldly, moving silently along the brick-lined walls. Some reported hearing cries or whispers that vanished when approached, leaving only the chill of the underground air. While skeptics dismissed these as imagination, the sheer number and consistency of reports suggest an enduring phenomenon that transcends simple explanation. The town maintains a curious duality: vibrant spas and historical charm above ground, and mysterious, nearly forgotten corridors below that hint at stories untold. Tourists stroll along brightly painted streets, enjoying quaint shops and art galleries, yet a few steps off the main avenues darkness and silence reign. Residents often speak of the town with a mixture of pride and wariness, acknowledging the allure of the springs while hinting that some areas are better left unexplored. The contrast between surface vitality and subterranean enigma reinforces the notion that Eureka Springs is far more than it appears to the casual observer. Modern explorers, researchers, and thrill-seekers continue to descend into these passageways, often returning with accounts of strange echoes and inexplicable sensations. Scientific study of the tunnels has focused on architecture and historical use, but anecdotes persist that defy conventional understanding. Sudden drops in temperature, echoes that mimic words, and walls that seem to breathe. Urban explorers publish maps with disclaimers, noting that no one can fully capture the tunnel's intricacies. The sense of unpredictability makes the town a living enigma, perpetually inviting investigation, while simultaneously discouraging full comprehension. Layers of cultural history, indigenous, European, and early American, intertwine with the tunnel's development, creating a tapestry where the unusual feels plausible and persistent. Archaeological studies suggest that some underground pathways may follow earlier natural features, such as streams or sinkholes, hinting at a continuum of human and environmental interaction. Folklore and historical documentation intersect, reinforcing the sense that the town story has been written both above and below ground, often in parallel and sometimes in contradiction. This interlacing of temporal and cultural threads gives Eureka Springs a depth that is both tangible and enigmatic. Psychological studies suggest that narrow, dimly lit environments naturally heighten perception of movement and sound, reinforcing the uncanny nature of the tunnel's ambience. Humans are particularly sensitive to stimuli in constrained spaces, and the tunnel's architecture amplifies this, causing ordinary creaks or drafts to seem intentional or sentient. For visitors, this often translates to a profound sense of tension, which is compounded by stories of the town's past disappearances and unusual phenomena. The result is an immersive atmosphere where history, architecture, and human perception converge to make the unknown feel almost alive. Longtime residents acknowledge that some areas exude a subtle warning, a sense that the past's residue has not entirely dissipated. Certain stairwells, sealed doors, or hidden chambers carry reputations that resist rational explanation, compelling locals to caution outsiders. These warnings are rarely explicit, yet their persistence across decades suggests that even those familiar with the town respect an invisible boundary. The combination of historical fact, folklore, and personal experience ensures that Eureka Springs maintains its dual identity, inviting yet foreboding, alluring yet secretive. Below the charming streets of Eureka Springs, the hidden tunnels hold secrets that refuse to fade, and those who wander their depths may find the town's history is far more restless than it seems. Bisbee, the deportation that shook a desert town. Tension simmered in Bisbee long before the town awoke to the thunder of unrest, a quiet unease threading through the miners' daily routines. Copper dust clung to clothes and machinery, but it could not hide the growing anxiety among those who laboured in the mines and the boarding houses that dotted the hills. The town's narrow streets carried whispers of discontent, and shopkeepers exchanged furtive glances, sensing that something unprecedented was approaching. While the sun rose over the desert hills, the normal rhythm of work and commerce felt strained, as if the earth itself had begun to hum with a warning no one could fully interpret. Rumours swirled that federal agents might intervene, and the stories from neighbouring mining towns lent a palpable tension to every handshake, every conversation, and every glance exchanged in the crowded saloons. The copper veins beneath the desert promised wealth, yet they also carried hidden fissures of conflict among workers and management alike. Mining companies profited from the demand for copper, but wages were uneven and labour conditions harsh. Miners often worked long hours in suffocating heat and damp shafts, and any effort to organise or protest could provoke swift retaliation. Families depended on their meagre earnings, yet an undercurrent of unease persisted, the result of tension that no contract or law could fully contain. Town meetings grew heated, as residents debated how far authorities might go to suppress union activity, and some workers spoke in hushed tones of the possibility of violent reprisals. Whispers of organised labour grew louder, threading through boarding houses and saloons, leaving some residents anxious about what might come next. Union organisers spoke cautiously, aware that their efforts were being watched, and every meeting carried the risk of reprisal. Word of strikes in other towns spread like wildfire, feeding both hope and fear among Bisbee's working class. A sense of solidarity clashed with paranoia, creating a charged atmosphere in a town already strained by economic dependence and cultural divisions. Tensions were amplified by the arrival of outside agitators, whose presence, however temporary, heightened suspicions and stirred both excitement and dread among the townspeople. Local authorities and mining executives moved behind closed doors, their plans shielded by shadows and secrecy that no outsider could penetrate. Meetings held at night, often in offices locked tight or in private homes, outlined measures to prevent labour unrest from spreading. Law enforcement officers and company officials shared information selectively, creating a sense of omnipresent observation. Rumours circulated that drastic action might be taken, though no one could verify the specifics, adding to a tension that clung to every street corner and alleyway. Some families reported feeling watched in their own homes, while the faint hum of trucks and whispered conversations made the town itself seem like a living witness to events yet to unfold. Rumours of sudden removals spread like wildfire, fueling a nervous anticipation that clung to every hallway and alleyway. Miners spoke quietly in the dark of night about previous labour conflicts in neighbouring towns, speculating on what might be done in Bisbee. Children were warned to stay indoors, and the town's public spaces felt charged with quiet apprehension. The idea that anyone could vanish without warning became more tangible, lingering in the air like dust stirred by a desert wind. Elders recalled similar incidents from decades prior, weaving a narrative of repeated suppression that gave the impending deportation an almost fated inevitability. On the morning of the deportation, the town seemed ordinary, yet every footstep and glance carried the weight of impending catastrophe. Men left for the mines as usual, and women went about their chores, but an invisible current of dread pulled at the edges of every interaction. Doors closed more carefully, voices were lowered, and the normal rhythm of commerce masked a tension that stretched from the hills to the desert floor. The ordinary facade could not conceal the extraordinary plan about to unfold. Citizens who might have walked freely through town now sensed the charged atmosphere, their instincts warning them that something profound and unsettling was about to occur. Miners were herded from homes and workplaces with little warning, confusion etched on faces as they were loaded into trucks and trains. The process was swift and brutal, leaving no room for resistance or negotiation. Families were separated, and belongings were left behind, abandoned in haste and uncertainty. Soldiers and deputies enforced the orders with little explanation, and the desert outside town loomed as both a literal and symbolic wilderness, an expanse that would swallow anyone who failed to comply. The suddenness of the action left permanent marks on the psyche of the community, embedding a collective memory of fear that would linger for generations. Fear mingled with disbelief as families watched their neighbours vanish, the desert awaiting them like a silent predator. Those left behind could only watch as the convoy disappeared over hills, the echoes of barking dogs, clanging metal, and shouted orders fading into an unsettling quiet. The immediate aftermath left an empty town centre, a hollow echo of its former bustle, where shopkeepers and children wandered through spaces now tinged with sudden absence and unease. Observers would later note how the normally vibrant streets seemed to sag under a weight they could not name, a stillness imposed not by time but by human action. The social fabric of Bisbee frayed as the deported wandered the harsh landscape, unsure if they would ever return. Exposed to the desert's relentless heat and arid winds, miners faced the immediate threats of dehydration and exposure. Communities that had seemed tight-knit moments before now felt tenuous, their connections severed by force. The psychological weight of dislocation settled like a shadow across the faces of those forced into exile, and every step taken in the barren terrain was a reminder of the authority that had cast them out. Descriptions from survivors recount walking for days with limited food or water, their clothing torn and faces sunburned, yet each step was a quiet testament to human endurance amid deliberate cruelty. Evidence of the event remained hidden in plain sight, from abandoned homes to quiet streets that retained the memory of sudden absence. Shop windows dusted with neglect, the occasional fence leaning under the weight of time, and the empty benches in the town square all hinted at the turmoil that had passed. Observers decades later would find the physical traces of disruption more telling than any written account, for the environment itself had absorbed the echoes of the night Bisbee changed forever. Signs of abrupt removal remained in personal effects left behind, crocks of food on stoves, newspapers open on tables, and children's toys scattered across deserted yards. Stories lingered among the residents of strange empty neighbourhoods where shadows seemed longer and the air carried unease. Parents cautioned children not to wander into deserted streets, while elders recounted whispers of faces that appeared at windows only to vanish. These recollections carried a haunting quality, a mix of factual memory and the eerie perception of a town unsettled by its own history. The line between rumour and reality blurred, leaving an indelible impression on those who remained. In some accounts, the townspeople spoke of hearing footsteps echoing through abandoned streets long after the deportation, as if memory itself had taken physical form. Investigations by journalists and historians slowly pieced together the narratives of those expelled, revealing details that were long suppressed. Letters, diaries, and court records provided fragments of what had occurred, allowing researchers to reconstruct the sequence of events and understand the broader social and political implications. Reports highlighted the role of mining executives, law enforcement, and federal involvement, confirming that the deportation was not an isolated incident, but a deliberate, calculated act to quell labour unrest. Archival photographs captured townspeople clustered in uneasy groups, eyes shifting, hands gripping belongings, their uncertainty frozen in time. Survivors' letters and oral histories painted a haunting portrait of fear and displacement, where the desert became both witness and jailer. Accounts describe men walking for miles with little food or water, families separated and uncertain, and the psychological toll of being treated as expendable. These narratives provide a human dimension that historical records alone cannot convey, highlighting the desperation, confusion, and quiet resilience of those forced into exile. Some letters detailed attempts to reach neighbouring towns, only to find doors closed and roads guarded, creating a sense that the entire region had conspired to erase them. The town's architecture and mining relics silently testify to a past scarred by human action, leaving echoes that visitors cannot fully interpret. Shuttered shops, abandoned machinery, and homes left with doors ajar speak to a sudden rupture in daily life. Even as the town evolved, these physical reminders retained a certain unease, hinting at stories that could not be fully told or forgotten, whispering the memory of a night that left Bisbee profoundly altered. Tourists today report an uncanny sensation in certain alleys, a chill or pressure that seems disproportionate to the desert heat, as though history has settled into the walls themselves. In museums and local lore, the memory of that night persists, a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety and civility in Bisbee. Exhibits display photographs, personal effects, and newspaper clippings, capturing fragments of the event while leaving much to the imagination. Guides recount the deportation with measured tones, acknowledging the human cost while hinting at shadows that continue to linger over the town. The narrative becomes part of the town itself, inseparable from its streets, hills, and the stories passed from one generation to the next. Visitors often note a subtle tension when walking certain streets, as if the town itself is quietly observing, reluctant to let the past fully fade. Among the silent streets and shuttered buildings, the desert seems to murmur the story of that night, as though it refuses to let the past be forgotten. Cape May, Victorian elegance and persistent apparitions. Marble staircases and ornate gables hint at a grandeur that masks an undercurrent of whispered stories. Cape May, New Jersey, long celebrated as the nation's oldest seaside resort, draws visitors with its impeccably preserved Victorian architecture, yet beneath the painted facades, reports of ghostly figures and unexplained sounds have persisted for generations. Strolling past its gingerbread-trimmed houses, one can sense that the town has absorbed centuries of human presence, some of which refuses to leave. The narrow streets and stately porches evoke an era when carriages rattled on cobblestones and gas lamps flickered with every breeze, and it is in these subtle details that Cape May's restless echoes are said to linger. The town's rise as a 19th century resort drew influential visitors whose fleeting lives sometimes left echoes behind. Wealthy families from Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore flocked here during the summer months, constructing grand hotels like Congress Hall and private estates that boasted sweeping porches and intricate fretwork. These visitors came seeking both leisure and social prestige, yet many of their stories ended abruptly with tragedy, illness, or sudden departure, feeding local lore. Historical records indicate that accidents, sudden deaths, and fires were not uncommon in a town bustling with summer activity, and each misfortune seemed to leave an invisible residue, reported by those who remained to witness inexplicable phenomena. Winding streets flanked by gingerbread-trimmed houses seemed to hold memories of laughter that abruptly fell silent. Passers-by have claimed to hear faint piano music from empty parlours or the distant murmur of voices from rooms long abandoned. Locals note that certain intersections consistently produce chills or a sense of being watched, particularly in the hours just after dusk. The combination of architecture, history, and the dense concentration of old buildings creates a kind of acoustic memory, where small noises reverberate with a ghostly resonance, allowing the past to echo in subtle yet unsettling ways. Local newspapers from the 1800s recorded guests who described shadowy figures moving through hotel corridors at night. The Cape May Star and Wave occasionally published letters recounting sightings of women in long dresses gliding silently past rooms, or men appearing near staircases, vanishing when approached. While some reports were dismissed as fanciful tales or attempts to entertain readers, a surprising number came from reputable visitors and hotel staff, suggesting that these experiences were neither isolated nor purely imaginative. Over time, these documented accounts became part of the town's enduring mystique, repeated in guidebooks and local histories alike. In the historic hotels, staff have long reported doors opening on their own and sudden cold drafts that defy explanation. Housekeepers in Congress Hall have recounted waking to find chairs displaced or hotel keys missing, only to reappear in unlikely locations. Guests sometimes describe hearing footsteps pacing the halls, particularly on the upper floors where few visitors ever stay. While such occurrences could be explained by old construction settling floors or the drafty nature of Victorian buildings, the consistency and specificity of these reports have long intrigued both residents and paranormal investigators who visit the town. Private residences harbour accounts of footsteps on empty staircases and furniture shifting when no one is present. Some of Cape May's private homes, passed down through generations, have retained these eerie reputations, with descendants speaking cautiously about their experiences. In one case, a family reported hearing whispers during dinner, only to discover no one else in the house. Other homeowners have described seeing fleeting shadows in windows or the sensation of being observed while alone. These domestic hauntings lend a sense of intimacy to the town's spectral presence, suggesting that the apparitions are not confined to public spaces but permeate the very fabric of everyday life. Even bustling streets near the boardwalk have produced strange sightings, including fleeting figures glimpsed from cornered alleys. Tourists occasionally glimpse what seems like a 19th century couple strolling along the promenade, their forms dissolving as they approach the sunlight. Local storytellers speak of recurring glimpses near abandoned shops or under the street lamps along Ocean Street, where historical photographs suggest these were once gathering points for early visitors. The juxtaposition of modern tourism and lingering apparitions creates an atmosphere in which Cape May's past seems to coexist with the present in shadowed, almost imperceptible ways. Candles and lanterns often flicker inexplicably, and windows reflect shapes that vanish when approached. In several historic inns, temporary electricity outages reveal how lighting anomalies can intensify the sense of presence, with shadows stretching unnaturally along walls. Reports of candles extinguishing on their own, or lanterns swinging without cause have been noted in diaries, letters, and more recent accounts, indicating that such phenomena are neither new nor isolated. Visitors are often left with the sense that something unseen is observing, a subtle reminder of a history that refuses to be fully tamed or understood. Some of Cape May's wealthiest families, long gone, are said to linger in the halls they once walked daily. Researchers have traced patterns of sightings to estates where prominent figures died, including socialites and merchants from the late 19th century. While there is no definitive explanation, the regularity of these accounts over decades suggests a continuity of presence. Guides conducting ghost tours frequently recount stories of spectral children seen in playrooms, or faint laughter drifting from vacant ballrooms, each tale tied to a family that once occupied the property. Letters and diaries uncovered in attics reveal residents struggling to understand recurring noises and unexplained movements. In some cases, homeowners documented entire nights of clocks chiming incorrectly, doors opening with no wind, or chairs moving without contact. These primary sources demonstrate that hauntings were observed across centuries, from the first generations of summer visitors to modern-day residents, highlighting a rare persistence that makes Cape May uniquely eerie among historical towns in America. Certain parlours and ballrooms are repeatedly cited in reports, as though particular rooms retain a memory of sorrow. The Physic estate, for example, has been linked to tales of apparitions gliding through the grand hall and sudden drops in temperature mid-afternoon. Ballrooms that once hosted lavish dances now produce an uneasy stillness, where the creak of a floorboard seems amplified in an otherwise silent room. Such recurring locations suggest that the town's architecture itself may act as a repository for human experience, amplifying the uncanny in ways that science struggles to explain. Skeptics note drafts and old floorboards, yet dozens of consistent accounts challenge simple explanations. While structural peculiarities may account for minor anomalies, the breadth and specificity of reports, names of figures, repeated occurrences, and sensations of observation indicate a phenomenon that transcends mere coincidence. Paranormal investigators have returned to the same sites over multiple decades, documenting events that continue to defy easy categorization, hinting at a deeper unresolved mystery within Cape May's historical core. Modern visitors report fleeting shadows, murmured voices, and the sense of being watched even in daylight. Photographers occasionally capture anomalies in images, and night tours frequently describe sudden drops in temperature or a strange, inexplicable feeling of tension in certain hallways. The convergence of history, architecture, and anecdotal accounts has made Cape May a mecca for those interested in ghostly lore. Yet the experiences remain largely unexplainable, maintaining the town's reputation for persistent apparitions. The town's reputation for hauntings now intertwines with tourism, yet the allure stems more from mystery than spectacle. Ghost tours, themed events, and preservation societies all capitalize on the town's unique ambience, but they also document sightings with care, noting locations, times, and conditions. The The result is a blend of commercial interest and genuine curiosity, allowing visitors to feel the town's history while acknowledging an invisible layer that continues to evoke unease. As night falls, the lamplight casts long dancing shadows across the streets, leaving a sense that something unseen remains. Residents and tourists alike remark that the quiet moments between waves of activity are when Cape May feels most alive with its hidden history. The faint creak of shutters, the whisper of the wind through eaves, and the echo of footsteps on wooden sidewalks all suggest that the town's past refuses to fade entirely, creating an enduring tension between its celebrated elegance and its persistent mysteries. The past lingers in every corner of Cape May, refusing to be forgotten, and those who wander too close may feel its quiet insistence. Alton, limestone bluffs and lingering shadows. Alton, perched against the steep limestone bluffs that rise like silent sentinels above the wide Mississippi River, holds a reputation that transcends the ordinary histories of small Midwestern towns. Here, the past seems to bleed into the present, visible not just on weathered stone and cracked brick, but in the uneasy whispers of the wind that snakes through narrow streets and forgotten cemeteries. What draws historians and ghost hunters alike is not solely the documented tragedies that shape this Illinois river city, its role in antebellum conflict, in the Civil War, in the fight for human freedom, but how those events are said to leave an imprint on the very landscape itself, anchored deep in porous limestone and shadowed bluffs where memory, fact, and fear converge. Long before Alton became a town of industry and abolitionist fervour, the native peoples of this region told stories of a monstrous creature, a painted bird perched high on the cliffs above the river. French missionary Jacques Marquette wrote of seeing the painted figures on the rock face in 1673, remarkable for their size and unsettling presence. Creatures that local tribes believed devoured those who ventured too close, a legend that became known as the tale of the Piazza bird, and later inspired fear in settlers and explorers alike. When European settlers built Alton in the early 19th century, they laid the town's foundations directly atop these bluffs, quarried the limestone beneath them for buildings and walls, and constructed thriving docks along the river's edge that made the town a vital link in trade and movement westward. That same stone would play an unintentional role in the city's darker legacy, as mortar and masonry from once grim sites of suffering were recycled into schools, homes, and businesses, leading some local chroniclers to suggest that fragments of the past, including pain and loss, never truly left the soil. Alton's Civil War history is particularly stark. In 1833, the Illinois State Penitentiary opened as the state's first penitentiary, its cells designed to hold scores of convicted men and women. By the time the Civil War engulfed the nation, this facility, situated near the river, was repurposed as a prison for thousands of Confederate soldiers captured in battle. In the overcrowded, unsanitary conditions, disease spread rapidly, and a deadly smallpox outbreak in the winter of 1863 claimed the lives of more than 1,000 prisoners, many buried in mass graves or on what became known as Smallpox Island in the river's currents. The Confederate cemetery on the north side of Alton stands today as a quiet, solemn testament to that chapter, a field of green grass interrupted by a towering obelisk inscribed with the names of soldiers whose stories ended here, far from home. It is said that on still mornings, mist rising from the river, visitors sometimes glimpse figures moving among the tombstones, shapes that dissipate like fog when approached, and hear faint murmurs that seem tied not to any living voice but to the weight of memory itself. Not far from these burial grounds, a remnant wall of the old prison endures, its crumbling stone a reminder of the suffering contained within its cells. Local historical accounts from the late 1800s tell of eerie sounds, footsteps in lockstep, cries, wails, that emanated from the ruin even after its abandonment, as if the place itself remembered the anguish of its past inhabitants. Over the decades, those who walk by at dusk or venturesome souls who linger near the wall at night recount the sensation that the air grows inexplicably heavier, that a chill settles over the ground where so many endured hardship and death. The stones of Alton are more than a metaphor. Scholars of local lore often point to the town's unique geology, where limestone outcroppings and caverns beneath the bluff might serve as conduits for sound and shadow, amplifying the natural echoes of river and wind into something that feels uncanny. This idea, sometimes called the stone tape theory by those who study hauntings, suggests that intense emotional events, like those that took place during war and social upheaval here, could be recorded in the very rock, waiting to replay for those attuned to its imprint. Whether one accepts such theories or not, the geology of Alton lends an atmospheric quality to every old house and historic building, from downtown storefronts to the grand estates perched on Christian Hill, where uneven foundations and shadowed cellars seem to invite the unquiet past into the present. Among the most talked about relics of Alton's haunted reputation is the McPike Mansion, an Italianate home built in 1869 by botanist and businessman Henry Guest McPike. For generations, the mansion has stood, its windows like empty eyes staring over the town, its halls and wine cellar the focus of countless reports of unexplained phenomena. Lights that flicker without source, orbs of luminescence caught on camera, and shadows that move against the grain of reason. Paranormal investigators and curious travellers alike claim to have heard footsteps when no one stands near, or voices whispering at volumes too quiet to identify, and some who venture into the mansion's depths say they feel watched, as if the house itself hosts memories too persistent to remain silent. A short walk from McPike, another of Alton's storied landmarks, stands as a testament to the town's collision of violence and idealism, the Elijah P. Lovejoy Monument. Lovejoy, an outspoken abolitionist editor, came to Alton in the 1830s and paid for his convictions with his life when a pro-slavery mob murdered him in 1837 as he defended his printing press from destruction. The obelisk that marks his grave looks out over the city he tried to change, and late-night visitors on quiet autumn evenings sometimes report an undefined presence near the base of the monument, as though the fight for justice and its tragic cost linger still in the cool air. Downtown Alton's historic structures, many built during the town's heyday as a river port, also carry their own uneasy histories. The Mineral Springs Hotel, once a spa retreat and now a commercial building, is linked in local tradition to numerous deaths, natural, accidental, and violent, that have happened on its grounds over the decades. Patrons hear unexplained footsteps in empty halls, see doors open and close of their own accord, or feel sudden cold drafts in rooms that should be warm with the sun's afternoon glow. These everyday yet unexplainable experiences blur the line between lived history and whispered legend, keeping alive the sense that Alton offers more than just old stone and brick. It offers a portal to the echoes of its own past. Alton cemeteries themselves are more than burial places. They are landscapes of memory, where rows of headstones stand like sentinels over the narratives that shaped the town from frontier outpost to industrial hub. Some visitors claim to see figures in period dress among the tombs at twilight, moving too steadily to be tricks of mist or moonlight, as though the souls interred there still walk their old haunts after nightfall. Others report that just beyond the clatter of the river at sunset, the wind carries whispers that sound far too human to be dismissed as mere breeze, murmuring names long forgotten by history books but not by the ground that bears them. Through the centuries, the Mississippi River itself has been both a lifeline and a harbinger at Alton's edge, its shifting currents and fog-shrouded mornings giving rise to both commerce and catastrophe. Steamboats once bustled here, their whistles echoing across water and stone, and countless travellers passed through the town on journeys west, their hopes and fears wrapped in equal measure with their freight. The river's tragedies, like the catastrophic explosion of the steamboat Sultana in 1865, further downstream, which claimed more lives than the Titanic, remain a quiet backdrop to the region's cultural memory and remind all who linger on the bluffs that the water carries stories just as deep and inscrutable as the limestone beneath their feet. In Alton, history does not settle into dusty archives but persists like a shadow at the edge of sight, where every old wall and silent street seems to hum with the unspoken weight of what came before. Those who walk here after dusk cannot help but sense that the limestone beneath them remembers far more than the living ever could. At night, when the river mists roll in and the lights of the bluff's old buildings burn low, it feels as though the dead of Alton are merely waiting for someone to listen. Skagway, gold rush fortune and sudden death. The narrow streets of Skagway once thrummed with the hurried steps of men and women chasing dreams forged in gold and fear, a place where the promise of wealth seemed to hang in the foggy air like the scent of salt from the nearby fjords. Prospectors stampeded up wooden boardwalks, lodging houses and saloons sprang up overnight, and the fervour of fortune seekers created an energy so thick it felt almost tangible. Beneath that energy, however, there was something else, something that clung to the corners of alleyways and lingered in the half-light of dusty windows, an unease born of loss as much as hope, as though the town itself absorbed the tension of every gamble and every misstep. In the spring of 1897, a flood of stampeders poured into the town, their voices blending with the creak of hastily built boardwalks and the whistle of arriving steamers, accelerating Skagway from a quiet Alaskan outpost into the epicenter of the Klondike gold rush. Men and women came from every direction, bearing tools and dreams, convinced that riches lay hidden somewhere beyond the cragged peaks that hem the valley. Rumours travelled fast, too, of easy claims and swift fortune, and with them came tension, tempers, and the sense that every opportunity also carried danger, as if luck in Skagway had a hidden ledger of debts yet to be collected. Lawlessness carved its own rules here, where vigilantes and outlaws claimed corners of alleys and saloons with lethal authority, and justice was as unpredictable as the icy torrents that carved gorges through the surrounding mountains. Skagway's earliest days were marked by bitter rivalries, threats, and the kind of swift, unforgiving violence that made even hardened travellers flinch. In a place where the law was thin and tempers ran hotter than the miner's pan over a campfire, human conflict joined the landscape as an unbidden force shaping fate, a reminder that gold often came with a cost far higher than coins. The docks were alive with the smell of salt and tar, but some nights sailors swore they saw shadows moving against the grain of the lantern light, figures that seemed to vanish when followed or to linger in places where no living soul should stand. The sound of ropes creaking in the wind and the slap of tide against pilings could be mistaken for nothing more than normal harbour noise, but those who stayed late into the night spoke of voices carried on the breeze, calls that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. Some claimed the whispers hinted at misfortune or loss, a warning carried by unseen witnesses to the town's frantic pursuit of gold. Miners disappeared with unsettling regularity, their bodies sometimes never recovered, and whispers of accidents or something else followed like smoke through the streets, turning tavern conversations into hushed confessions. Some folk claimed that certain trails leading into the mountains swallowed men whole, that the wilderness itself was uncompromising in its indifference, and that the desperate focus on gold blinded many to the risks that surrounded them. Whether misfortune or misstep, the tally of those never seen again grew with each passing season, and with every tale passed down, Skagway's streets became not only a symbol of opportunity, but also a repository of unspoken fear. The glaciers and rivers that surrounded Skagway offered both passage and peril, their unpredictable moods turning fortune into tragedy with little warning, like the White Pass Trail, where ice, rock and weather conspired in equal measure against unwary travellers. Creeks that seemed tame beneath summer skies could swell overnight, sweeping packs and lives into cold depths. Avalanches thundered down slopes with a finality that left no sound afterward, only stunned silence and traces of movement where promise once stood. Even experienced guides often cautioned that no map could fully chart the dangers hidden within the seemingly serene Alaskan wilderness. Infamous figures, both lawmen and criminals, left a trail of violent encounters that lingered long after their deeds were committed, stories retold in saloons with greater drama than fact could withstand. Saloons like the Arctic Brotherhood Hall bore witness to brawls and shootouts, where a quick temper or a misunderstood word could spell the end of a man's story before breakfast was served. These characters, larger than life and sometimes as brutal as the land itself, became woven into the fabric of Skagway's narrative. Figures of admiration for some, warnings for others, and touchstones for every tale of misfortune whispered in the dark corners of town. Old-timers speak of warnings passed through generations, cautionary tales embroidered with misfortune, and the sense that some luck carries a hidden price, as though fortune here was never freely given but rather borrowed with interest collected in sweat and blood. These shared memories became part of the town's collective psyche, part caution and part myth, urging travellers to respect the territory while nurturing fear of what lurked beyond the reach of warm hearths and oil lamps. Even casual observers cannot escape the subtle sense that Skagway remembers everyone who came seeking gold, and that some echoes never leave. Among the preserved saloons and boarding houses, lights flicker and doors slam unbidden, keeping alive the feeling that someone or something still occupies those rooms long after the bustle of the gold rush faded into history. Visitors recount corridors cold in mid-afternoon sunlight, the scent of tobacco thick in places where no smoking is allowed, or the sound of laughter echoing from empty spaces. Whether imagination or residual echo of what once was, these sensations refuse easy explanation and invite speculation, reinforcing the idea that Skagway's past is never truly past. Tourists and investigators alike recount sensations that defy explanation. A hand brushing a shoulder, distant laughter when no one is near, or cold drafts in rooms that should be sun-warmed. Some who entered Skagway's historic hotels report waking to the sensation of being watched, chairs scraping across floors where no one stands, clocks ticking down hours that never arrived. These accounts blur the line between personal perception and shared experience, leaving a lingering uncertainty that pervades the town's aura, a subtle dread that threads through the old buildings like a hidden current. Beyond the main streets, abandoned trails and encampments reveal relics of hurried prospecting, and some claim the land itself seems to resist disturbance, as though rooted memories of toil and desperation cling to rock and soil stubbornly. Rusted tools lie half-buried where snowmelt reveals them each spring, alongside shards of tin cups and leather boots once worn by men who never made it back to town. The cold, silent remnants stand in stark contrast to the frenzied energy of the past, a ghostly testament to fortune's fleeting promise. Patterns of sudden death emerge in the town's lore, connecting geography, climate, and human obsession into a chilling tapestry of risk and loss, where tragedy often struck at the moment of greatest triumph. A strike that should have meant celebration might instead signal a collapse, a landslide, or a fall from a slick precipice. In Skagway, the margin between success and calamity was not merely narrow, it was often invisible until it had already claimed its toll, leaving behind more questions than answers. The relentless pursuit of gold left behind more than empty cabins. It created an undercurrent of obsession that some say still tugs at visitors' ambitions, as though the very desire for wealth alters the way footsteps are placed on paths, and decisions are measured under the night sky. Travellers admit to pacing the same streets that once hosted fortune seekers, feeling that same restless itch to probe deeper into what lies beyond, even after knowing the stories of those who never returned. Every corner seems charged with the memory of risk, and the thrill of potential reward mingles uneasily with the shadow of mortality. Even after generations, Skagway's energy feels unfinished, a lingering tension where hope and desperation coexist in uneasy equilibrium, as though the town itself refuses to settle into quiet retirement. The boardwalks creak underfoot not simply from age but from the weight of all who passed over them, and the wind that blows from high ridges carries more than chill. It murmurs of ambition and loss in equal measure. Here, history is not inert, but something that breathes with every gust through empty storefronts, and each echo of the past feels alive, waiting for someone to notice it. The echoes of fortune and failure reverberate through the town, seeping into alleyways, empty lots, and the creaking planks of deserted wharves, challenging the living to decide what is realist caution and what is lingering whisper. Skagway's story is not one of gentle nostalgia for a bygone era, but a tapestry woven with vivid threads of desperation, triumph, and the inexplicable, leaving each visitor to wrestle with the question of whether the past here seeks to warn or to draw the curious ever deeper into its fold. Even at present, when the wind whistles down Skagway's narrow streets and the tide licks against the old docks, it is as if fortune and death still walk shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the next unwary traveller to heed their unspoken warning. Bodie, the ghost town that warns visitors not to take anything. Sunlight filters through broken windows in Bodie, catching dust motes that float like tiny ghosts over creaking floorboards, hinting at a town suspended between past and present. The streets, deserted for nearly a century, hold a silence so complete that even the faintest sound echoes across empty boardwalks. Each abandoned structure seems to exhale history, from the weathered saloon doors to the crooked rooflines of miners' cabins. There is an undeniable tension in the air, a subtle unease that suggests the town itself has memory, aware of every visitor who dares to step lightly among its fragile relics. During the late 1800s, Bodie grew almost overnight, a frenzied gold rush settlement swelling to thousands as miners poured into the Sierra Nevada in search of fortune. By 1879, the population had peaked at more than 5,000, and the town was alive with the clang of mining equipment, the chatter of prospectors, and the occasional gunshot. Every hill and gulch seemed to offer promise, yet every corner also hid danger. Bodie's rapid expansion created a chaotic energy, one where ambition and desperation coexisted in a fragile balance, leaving behind an indelible imprint that lingers in the empty streets today. Law and order struggled to keep pace with ambition, and saloons, gambling halls, and makeshift courts became arenas where tempers flared and consequences were immediate. Violence was frequent, disputes were settled quickly, and reputation was a matter of survival. Stories survive of brawls that ended in sudden death, of gamblers' debts enforced at gunpoint, and of outsiders learning too late that the town had its own harsh rules. Even as miners chased gold, they navigated a social minefield where every handshake might conceal betrayal, and every raised voice could bring disaster within minutes. Empty homes, stores, and churches stand as mute witnesses to a hurriedly built town, their weathered facades telling stories more vividly than any written record. Window panes are fractured, doors hang on rusted hinges, and wooden sidewalks sag under their own weight. The interior spaces preserve echoes of the past, overturned chairs, scattered papers, and the remnants of daily life frozen in time. Walking through these structures, one cannot help but sense that the town remembers its former occupants, and that every shadow and flicker of light is a quiet testimony to the lives abruptly abandoned in pursuit of gold. Locals and visitors alike speak of a strange pattern. Those who remove even the smallest artifact often return with misfortune trailing behind, as though Bodie exacts its own justice. Tales of stolen trinkets leading to injury, theft, or inexplicable accidents circulate widely, and photographers or souvenir seekers are often warned to resist temptation. Even objects as trivial as a nail or a fragment of a bottle are said to carry the town's memory, a subtle but insistent claim on those who disturb it. This reputation has become part of Bodie's identity, a mysterious law that transcends human authority. Bitter winds sweep across the hills, and harsh winters ensured that survival here was never guaranteed, adding a silent menace to the town's already precarious life. Snow can accumulate for weeks, burying buildings, roads, and equipment, leaving only the tips of chimneys or fence posts visible. Miners and their families endured extreme cold and isolation, often relying on fragile cabins and poorly insulated shelters. The natural environment amplified the town's danger, turning a misstep into a potential catastrophe and teaching inhabitants that the land itself was as unforgiving as the human struggles it hosted. Fires, storms, and other disasters struck repeatedly, leaving scorched timbers and collapsed roofs that serve as reminders of Bodie's violent, sometimes inexplicable decline. In 1892, a series of fires devastated large portions of the business district, reducing saloons, hotels, and general stores to ash and ruin. These events compounded the town's instability and fed local superstition, leaving survivors to interpret misfortune as both chance and consequence. The ruins that remain today, charred and fragile, amplify the eerie sense that Bodie's past refuses to be forgotten or disturbed. Tales persist of shadows slipping through alleyways, unexplained footsteps echoing on boardwalks, and faint whispers in the empty schoolhouse that defy rational explanation. Visitors describe feeling watched or experiencing sudden chills as they wander through deserted streets, often in places where no other person is near. Some report fleeting glimpses of figures that vanish when approached, leaving behind only the sensation of a presence. These stories, repeated for decades, have transformed Bodie into a living cautionary tale, where human perception intersects with the uncanny in ways that cannot be entirely explained. Preservation efforts have frozen the town in time, with every building, sign, and fence carefully maintained, yet the stillness only amplifies the sense that Bodie is watching. Boards are replaced, roofs stabilized, and artifacts catalogued, yet the structure's weathered appearance continues to exude an air of unreliability. The deliberate conservation highlights decay rather than erasure, making visitors aware of both the fragility of human effort and the persistence of the past. In Bodie, preservation does not diminish the uncanny, it accentuates it, emphasizing the tension between what is cared for and what is untouchable. Modern-day visitors often describe sudden chills, fleeting glimpses of movement, or sensations that suggest something unseen is aware of their presence among the deserted streets. Tourists recount feeling a subtle pull towards certain buildings or an urge to replace objects carefully where they found them. Guides speak of photographs that capture fleeting shapes, shadows that appear only in the corner of a lens, and footsteps echoing along deserted pathways. Even skeptical visitors admit that Bodie has a way of making the ordinary feel uncanny, reminding all who enter that the town's silence carries an unmistakable weight. The landscape itself carries the weight of past ambition and loss, each abandoned mine and crumbling cabin echoing a warning to those who tread too boldly. Hillsides scarred with diggings and tailings testify to years of relentless pursuit, while empty lots and collapsed structures speak of hopes unrealized. Every incline and valley seems to record the toil and misfortune of miners who once called Bodie home. Nature, partially reclaiming the town, collaborates in the eerie atmosphere, reminding observers that both human and environmental forces conspired in the town's rise and inevitable decline. Recurrent stories of accidents, thefts, or unexpected setbacks among tourists and locals reinforce the town's reputation as a place where misfortune seems to attach itself to the careless. Photographers dropping cameras, hikers losing balance on boardwalks, and those tempted to pocket small relics often report a string of minor but uncanny incidents. These anecdotes, persistent across decades, transform Bodie from an abandoned town into a landscape imbued with caution, where the past exerts influence over those who enter, silently demanding respect for what has been left behind. Psychologists note that abandoned places often evoke unease, but in Bodie, even those skeptical of superstition find themselves sensing an almost tangible, watchful presence. The human mind, confronted with isolation, silence, and tangible evidence of past life, begins to interpret ordinary occurrences as signs. Shifting shadows, creaking timbers, and wind through broken windows become imbued with meaning. Bodie's atmosphere exploits this effect naturally. The town's architecture, history, and unbroken silence converge to create a pervasive feeling that the past is observing, and that some behaviours will not go unnoticed. Silence dominates the town, broken only by the wind, the occasional creak of a shutter, or the rustle of rodents through empty cabins, creating an atmosphere that feels alive in its stillness. Every hallway, every sagging floorboard seems poised to tell its story if one listens closely. Even the absence of people is oppressive, as if Bodie has simply paused, waiting for visitors to test its boundaries. In these moments, it is impossible to dismiss the uncanny energy lingering in the air, a quiet admonition woven into every shadowed corner. Every doorway, every boardwalk, and every hollow window seems to whisper a lesson learned long ago. The past of Bodie is not inert, and the town's memory is far from forgiving. Those who enter and disturb even the smallest relic risk awakening consequences that persist beyond immediate perception. The abandoned streets are both invitation and warning, reminding observers that while human ambition created Bodie's glory, it is the quiet, unyielding stillness of the town itself that endures and watches. In Bodie, even the wind seems to whisper its caution, as if the town itself knows which footsteps might tempt fate and which should turn away before it is too late. Port Gamble, a company town frozen in time. Fog drifts along the waterfront of Port Gamble, curling around weathered mill buildings and shuttered homes, giving the town the appearance of holding its breath through decades of quiet. The water laps softly against the docks, echoing faintly off the timbered structures as if the sound itself remembers the days of bustling sawmills. Shadows of the surrounding pines stretch across the streets, adding depth to the town's stillness, and even the wind seems to hesitate, moving cautiously through narrow alleys and empty homes. Visitors step lightly, sensing that this is not merely an abandoned town, but a place where history remains watchful. Founded in 1853 as a lumber mill settlement, Port Gamble quickly became a hub of productivity, its sawmills cutting through timber while the town itself expanded under the careful eye of company management. The Puget Sound Lumber Company oversaw every detail, from construction to daily schedules, creating a place where work and home were inseparable. Miners, mill hands, and their families lived side by side, forming a rigid social and economic ecosystem. Streets were lined with modest homes, stores, and a company office, all designed for efficiency, yet giving the impression of careful order that persists to this day. Every street and building reflected the company's order, from uniform homes lined along the main road to strict schedules that governed work, play and rest, creating an almost mechanical rhythm to daily life. Children attended lessons in tidy classrooms, men reported to the mill punctually, and leisure activities were often scheduled to maintain morale and productivity. This structure left little room for improvisation, yet it produced a town with a clarity and symmetry that still impresses modern visitors. Walking through Port Gamble, one feels a trace of that discipline, as if invisible hands are ensuring that the routines continue even in the absence of people. Wooden sidewalks creak beneath imagined footsteps, and the neatly preserved shops and houses painted in muted tones seem to trap a sense of human presence that refuses to leave entirely. Doors hang slightly open, shutters rattle gently, and the faint smell of old timber mingles with the mist rolling off the bay. The structure's solidity belies the fragility of human life that once animated them, creating a tension between permanence and impermanence. Even without sound or movement, the town communicates a quiet insistence, a reminder that the lives it sheltered were governed by precision and purpose, and that some of that energy remains embedded in the very wood and brick. The former schoolhouse dominates a quiet corner of town, its windows dark yet strangely expressive, and visitors often report fleeting noises that suggest echoes of lessons long concluded. Footsteps on worn floorboards, whispers drifting from empty rooms, and the sudden impression of being watched are common enough to have been noted in local guides and historical accounts. Children's laughter, long gone, seems to linger in the shadows, faint but persistent. The schoolhouse stands as a symbolic heart of the town's communal life, a place where order, learning and routine were once enforced with near-military precision, and today the echoes of that structure continue to unsettle those who enter. Residents of Port Gamble followed strict routines, from clocking in at the mill to attending communal events, and even after decades, the town's layout seems to preserve that rhythm in its architecture. Weekdays and weekends were carefully delineated, holidays marked with public gatherings, and work expectations unyielding. The streets, still lined with company-built homes, reflect a tempo that outsiders can almost sense, a pattern of existence that persists in the absence of its original inhabitants. Observers can feel the push and pull of a life once regimented, as though the town itself continues to enforce the order it once demanded of its people. Dense forests and shoreline mists surround the town, filtering sunlight and carrying sounds that can turn ordinary creaks or rustles into whispers that stir the imagination. The trees press close to the edges of streets and buildings, concealing corners and amplifying the isolation of the town. Birds' calls and distant gulls mingle with the sigh of the wind through eaves, producing an atmosphere that feels simultaneously natural and deliberate. Even the harbour, once a site of bustling commerce, seems subdued, its waters reflecting the structures above with a stillness that suggests both protection and observation, as if the surrounding environment conspires with the town to preserve its haunting character. Accounts persist of doors opening when no one is near, of lights flickering in empty rooms, and of soft footfalls that vanish as quickly as they are perceived, lending an inexplicable weight to the town's quiet streets. Tourists occasionally photograph empty interiors, only to find blurry shapes or shadows that do not correspond to any physical object. Guides relay stories of unexplained knocks on walls or doors, of windows rattling despite calm winds, and of rooms that feel charged with a presence. While none of these occurrences are violent, their consistency creates a persistent unease, a subtle assertion that the town remains conscious of those who explore its carefully preserved spaces. Seasonal gatherings and labour rituals once marked the flow of life here, and echoes of those traditions seem to linger in the quiet boardwalks, the empty houses, and the still-milled saws. Annual celebrations, harvest feasts, and holiday observances once punctuated the structured life of residents, creating predictable rhythms. Even in the absence, these rhythms are perceivable. The layout of streets, the positioning of buildings, and the remnants of communal spaces preserve the cadence of the past. Visitors may sense, in the silence between the waves of the harbour or the creak of the boardwalk, that the town retains a memory of its former social cycles, as though history itself still rehearses here. Modern preservation keeps Port Gamble almost perfectly intact, yet the meticulous care paradoxically heightens the feeling that the town is frozen not by age, but by observation. Roofs are stabilised, paint maintained, and wooden walkways restored, producing a clarity that accentuates the town's stillness. Unlike ruins where decay dominates, Port Gamble's preservation emphasises the human footprint, leaving an uncanny impression of presence without occupancy. Every restored building, every neatly aligned window, serves to remind visitors that the town's life was deliberate and precise, and that its memory is carefully curated, almost as though the town itself has chosen which aspects of its past to display. Visitors often speak of a subtle sense of being watched, of shadows that move without source, or of sudden chills in rooms where the past feels palpably close. Individuals exploring the old office or the mill frequently report an inexplicable awareness, a feeling that someone unseen is tracking movement. Even skeptics concede that certain areas provoke unease disproportionate to the empty surroundings. These impressions are difficult to measure, yet their persistence adds a layer of psychological tension to the experience of Port Gamble, transforming it from a historical site into an environment charged with invisible observation. Local legends tell of unseen presences around the schoolhouse and mill, small hints of disquiet that transform ordinary buildings into spaces that provoke curiosity and unease. Stories passed down by historians, guides, and occasional residents speak of lights appearing at night in empty rooms, of soft music drifting across the harbour, and of whispers that dissolve upon approach. Though unverifiable, these tales persist because they resonate with the town's unusual atmosphere. Port Gamble's reputation as a site of subtle mysteries grows precisely from the tension between documented history and the unexplainable sensations reported by visitors who walk its preserved streets. The town's careful order and structural symmetry make the subtle strangeness more pronounced, as if the precision itself has amplified the sense that life lingers behind every shuttered window. Every aligned doorway, evenly spaced house, and straight boardwalk emphasises the contrast between human intention and the eerie quality of absence. The town appears designed for efficiency, yet in its meticulousness, it evokes the sensation that it is a stage awaiting actors long gone, while still hinting that someone, or something, remains to observe the audience. Silence dominates the streets, punctuated only by the distant gulls over the harbour or the sigh of wind through eaves, creating an environment that is both inviting and unnerving. The absence of human noise magnifies each minor sound, from a footstep on a wooden sidewalk to the shifting of a sign in the wind. In these moments, the town's past seems to reach forward, allowing visitors to imagine lives once structured by industry and expectation. Even the natural environment seems complicit, amplifying the tension between preserved order and the subtle suggestions of presence that linger everywhere. Every corner, every hallway, every boardwalk seems to hold the memory of countless footsteps, preserving the rhythm of a once lively town while hinting at unseen observers who continue to measure the present. The harmony of streets, houses, and mills functions as both evidence of past order and a framework for lingering mystery. Observers cannot help but feel that the town is aware of their intrusion, that each movement is noted and reflected through the quiet architecture. Port Gamble is not simply frozen in time, it is suspended in a delicate balance of memory, preservation, and subtle, inexplicable awareness. In Port Gamble, the creak of a floorboard or the whisper of wind through shuttered windows seems almost intentional, as if the town itself watches, keeping count of every visitor who dares to tread its frozen streets. Elkhorn, silver boom, sudden collapse, and echoes in the mountains. The faint clang of forgotten tools seems to hang in the air, as if the miners of Elkhorn still toil in silence while their cabins and streets stand abandoned. Wind whistles through empty doorways, stirring dust that has lain undisturbed for decades, and the mountains themselves seem to hold a quiet judgment over a town built on fleeting fortune. Each weathered building bears the imprint of hurried ambition. Its splintered wood and rusting nails are a reminder of labour, risk, and the transience of wealth. Even without people, Elkhorn hums with memory, a place where history refuses to be fully silent. When silver was discovered in the early 1880s, miners, prospectors, and entrepreneurs flooded the region, erecting tents, shacks, and hastily built stores to serve a population desperate to stake its claim. The allure of quick fortune drew families and loners alike, creating a patchwork of lives bound together by hope and uncertainty. The town's streets quickly filled with activity, its heartbeat defined by pickaxes striking rock and the shouts of those negotiating claims or disputes over the latest vein. In a matter of months, Elkhorn transformed from a wilderness outpost into a thriving, chaotic centre of extraction and commerce. Within a few years, the town had streets lined with saloons, general stores, hotels, and homes constructed from rough timber, forming a bustling settlement that seemed invincible against the surrounding wilderness. Wooden sidewalks connected the businesses, while boardwalks led to the few essential public spaces. Children played between the cabins, dogs ran through the alleys, and miners' voices echoed against the mountains as if nature itself had joined the chorus of activity. The town's growth was so rapid that it appeared both inevitable and precarious, a fragile balance that depended entirely on the continuation of the silver veins that underpinned its existence. Law and order existed but barely restrained tempers. Disputes over claims, debts, and miscommunication often erupted into violent confrontations, leaving lasting tension among a community both ambitious and impermanent. Saloons became arenas for argument, and hired guards patrolled streets where disagreements could escalate quickly. Justice was often swift, sometimes brutal, reflecting the town's dependence on quick resolution to maintain stability. Yet even with rules in place, human ambition and desperation left an undercurrent of danger that never fully subsided. Visitors today report feeling a similar unease, as if the echoes of old conflicts still ripple through the empty streets. Mining was grueling, dangerous work. Shafts collapsed, equipment failed, and sudden rock slides claimed lives without warning, instilling a persistent sense of fragility beneath the town's energetic exterior. The constant threat of disaster shaped daily life, making the townspeople both resilient and tense. Even those who survived the shaft's dangers could not escape the psychological weight of knowing how quickly fortunes and lives could disappear. This tension is embedded in the landscape itself, in the jagged cliffs and narrow canyons surrounding Elkhorn, reminding modern explorers that the mountain holds memory as firmly as the miners held their picks. The silver veins eventually ran thin, investors pulled out, and the economic engine that had fueled Elkhorn ground to a halt, leaving buildings empty and streets eerily silent almost overnight. Families packed up and left, stores shuttered, and the lively clamour of daily life evaporated, replaced by the distant creak of weathered structures and the occasional howl of wind through deserted alleys. Within a matter of years, what had been a thriving community became a ghost town, its empty homes standing as monuments to human ambition, hope, and failure. The suddenness of departure left no time for memory to settle. The mountains absorbed it all, preserving echoes in stone and timber. Today, surviving cabins lean slightly, their roofs sagging under years of neglect, and old mines gape like dark mouths in the mountainside, hinting at the labour and life that vanished so quickly. Rusted tools lie abandoned, windows shatter with age, and the once bustling thoroughfares are now corridors of silence. Visitors wandering through Elkhorn report a sense of displacement, as if they have stepped not only into space but into the weight of history itself. Every board nailed into place, every door left ajar, contributes to a feeling that the town is more than a memory. It is an active witness to its own disappearance. Visitors occasionally report hearing faint hammering from within abandoned buildings, footsteps along deserted streets, or glimpses of figures that vanish when approached, giving the ruins a spectral vitality. Some describe the subtle impression of being followed, of eyes tracking them from shadowed windows though no one is visible. The rhythm of past life seems to pulse faintly beneath the surface of emptiness, a reminder that Elkhorn was once defined by human effort, ambition, and desire. These unexplained phenomena are fleeting and subjective, yet they contribute to the town's reputation as a place where the past refuses to fully surrender its presence. Those who explore the remnants describe a tension between awe and unease, sensing the echoes of hurried lives, whispered conversations, and the weight of ambitions left unfinished in every weathered corner. The alignment of buildings, the spacing of streets, and the placement of the mines suggest careful planning and purposeful construction, yet the abruptness of abandonment introduces disorder into the pattern, a reminder that human intent is fragile. Walkways are interrupted by collapsed timber, doorways lead to empty rooms, and the smell of pine and stone carries the quiet insistence of human absence that somehow feels observed rather than forgotten. Fog and mist swirl around the surrounding peaks, and winter winds howl through narrow canyons, amplifying every creak, whistle and rustle into a suggestion that the mountains themselves hold onto the town's memory. Snow collects in corners, hiding broken boards and worn paths, and the sun casts long, shifting shadows across deserted streets. Even on clear days, the angles of light reveal fragments of structures half buried by time, as though the town refuses to vanish completely. Each environmental detail works with the town's ruins to produce a pervasive, haunting tension, immersing visitors in a landscape that balances beauty and danger. Among the decaying structures, the remnants of Elkhorn seem to pulse with the stories of those who came for fortune and vanished, leaving the mountains to guard their ambitions and regrets with an unspoken vigilance. Timber walls, collapsed roofs, and open mine shafts form a lattice of memory, each element carrying the imprint of life once lived with intensity and urgency. The mountains themselves loom as silent witnesses, preserving both triumph and disaster, creating a terrain where history, legend, and eerie observation converge in ways that are impossible to ignore. In Elkhorn, the wind weaving through abandoned cabins carries more than the scent of pine and stone. It whispers the ambitions and mistakes of a town that vanished too quickly to be forgotten,